Online symposium, exploring role identity across learning environments, new perspectives. My name is Eric Hintz, and I'm the acting director of the Lemelson Center for the Study of Invention and Innovation, which is part of the Smithsonian Institution's National Museum of American History in Washington, D.C. Again, welcome. We're glad you can join us today. Before I say a few words about today's program, I want to go over a few housekeeping items. You may be streaming this program directly from Eventbrite's webpage. However, for the best viewing experience, we recommend using the Zoom application. Please use the chat feature to share observations and engage in conversation with your fellow attendees. There's a drop-down box on the chat feature, and we encourage you to share your observations with everyone, not just the host and panelists. Please use the Q&A feature and the control panel that runs across the bottom of your Zoom screen to post questions for our panelists. Questions will come to our moderator, who will try to address as many of them as time permits. You can start posting those questions at any time. Please select the closed caption button if you'd like to view the live CART transcription of the webinar. Special thanks to our captioners from Joyful Signing for making today's program more accessible. And we thank everyone for adhering to the Smithsonian Code of Conduct by remaining civil and respectful with your comments and questions. We have 3 sessions today, punctuated by a couple of short breaks. During the breaks, we'll keep the Zoom webinar running. We'll mute all the cameras and mics and invite our speakers and you, the audience, to briefly step away. Finally, we are recording these sessions. After some post-production, we will post the videos to the event website and the Lemelson Center's YouTube channel. As I mentioned, the Lemelson Center is located within the Smithsonian's National Museum of American History. The center was founded in 1995 thanks to the philanthropic support of the inventor Jerome Lemelson and his family. The Lemelson Center strives to educate and empower the public to participate in technological, economic, and social change. By drawing on and contributing to the Smithsonian's world-leading collection of artifacts and archival materials, the Lemelson Center's scholarship, exhibitions, educational initiatives, and public programming advance the historical study of invention and innovation, encourage children and adults to apply their curiosity to real-world problems, and we showcase the diversity of inventors who have shaped our world. We invite you to learn more about our work at invention.si.edu. Since 1995, the Lemelson Center's annual symposium series, New Perspectives on Invention and Innovation, has brought together scholars, educators, and practitioners for cross-disciplinary dialogue at the intersection of history, innovation, and social change. Our 2025 symposium focuses on role identity, how individuals construct, evolve, and express who they are across different life domains. The symposium today will also examine the narratives, contexts, and forces that shape identity exploration in classrooms, museums, and cultural institutions. During today's symposium, a distinguished group of historians, educators, psychologists, and museum professionals will describe theoretical models like the dynamic systems model of role identity and connect those models to practical applications in educational and cultural settings. They will highlight case studies where identity work fosters belonging, agency, and community engagement. And they will provide attendees with tools, frameworks, and strategies to apply in their own learning environments. So to keep us organized and on track, we have today our moderator and master of ceremonies, my friend, Jesse Lovejoy. I'll invite Jesse to turn on his camera and mic while I read his bio, and he in turn will introduce the speaker and theme for our first session. So my friend, Jesse Lovejoy, is a strategic and programmatic design consultant working within the sports, museum, and nonprofit spaces to bring bespoke STEAM education experiences to youth furthest from resources and opportunity. He is the originator and former senior director for both 49ers EDU and the San Francisco 49ers Museum, and the founder of EDU Academy and Lovejoy Strategies. While spearheading the 2014 launch of the 49ers Museum, a 20,000 square foot facility at Levi's Stadium featuring 11 unique gallery and exhibit spaces exclusively dedicated to the 49ers past, present, and future, Lovejoy concurrently led the 49ers into a domain where no professional sports organization had ventured before: a comprehensive direct service STEAM education program for students in grades K through 8, completely free to the end user. In 2017, his interest in the 49ers EDU efforts exploded. Lovejoy founded EDU Academy, a 49ers-owned consulting arm which helped organizations envision, build, and launch their own education programs. EDU Academy's clients included the Los Angeles Rams, Chelsea Football Club, the National Soccer Hall of Fame and FC Dallas, Leeds United, the Oklahoma City National Memorial and Museum, and more. EDU Academy was the precursor to Lovejoy Strategies, which Jesse founded in 2022 to service his current partners, which include the Golden State Warriors, Los Angeles Rams, the Smithsonian Institution, the Saban Center, Play Like a Girl, and many others. And indeed, I should say our team here at the Smithsonian's Lemelson Center continues to work very closely with Jesse to develop educational programming at the intersection of invention, technology, and sports. And we're just delighted that he can moderate the sessions for today's symposium. So Jesse, thank you very much. Take it away, sir.
Mr. Hintz, that is the warmest and most wonderful introduction I've had in quite some time. So thank you, my friend, and thank you all for allowing me to moderate this session today. I will say good morning to those of you on the West Coast like myself sitting in Santa Cruz, California. Good afternoon to those of you on the East Coast, and happy brunch time to those in the middle. And the really cool thing about working for the Smithsonian is I get to say good evening to people who are taking this in from overseas. I am so proud to be with you today. We'll be bringing us into and out of all the sessions that we have for you, which are have been finely curated, excuse me, to give you an incredible look at theory, then practice, real-world case studies, all about role identity in the different environments that we're exploring today. So we're going to we'll be like a lens, right? We're going to come into focus, go from concept to application to lived experience, and explore lots of different ideas along the way. I will reinforce that if you have a question, you can put it into the question and answer feature. I'm noticing the chat's also already lively, so feel free to use that. My goal today is to be brief in bringing you up to speed on who's presenting, what they'll be presenting, and then giving a little bit of creative inspiration to our thinking as we exit and enter each session. And with that, I'll bring us to our first session of the day, which is titled Mapping the Self in Context, and is designed to give us a new perspective on learning and identity exploration in education and cultural institutions. It is a deep look into the key theories and frameworks that really have driven this entire program today. The work that you're going to be learning about, and this session in particular, have been prepared by Dr. Joanna Garner and Dr. Avi Kaplan. And Joanna will speak about that in just a minute. As I introduce Joanna by reading her bio, I will ask her to turn her camera on and come alive for the group. Joanna is the Executive Director and Research Professor at the Center for Educational Partnerships at Old Dominion University. She holds a doctorate degree in educational psychology from the Pennsylvania State University and a bachelor's and master's degrees in psychology from the University of Surrey in the UK. As the co-developer of the dynamic systems model of role identity, get used to this acronym because you'll probably hear it a lot today. It's the DSMRI. Her design-based research promotes adults and youth learning, identity development, and sense of agency as they engage in school, museum, and organizational contexts. And Dr. Kaplan, our dear friend, who unfortunately couldn't be with us today, and Joanna will get into that in just a minute, is a professor of educational psychology at Temple University. Avi is, his research focuses on people's motivation and identity development with a particular interest in the role of the environment in these processes. And together with Joanna, Avi is the other co-developer of the DSMRI, which, as we've talked about, is it's a model to identify a model of identity, motivation, emotion, and learning. And he served as the president of the Division of Educational Psychology of the American Psychological Institution. He's a fellow of the American Educational Research Association, the Association of Psychological Science, and the American Psychological Association. and he's the former editor of the Journal of Experimental Education. Having introduced our two experts and my dear friends, I will now turn the floor to Dr. Joanna Garner, who will begin our first presentation of the day.
Thank you so much, Jesse, for that introduction, and thank you to Eric and to the Lemelson team. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. All right, if you could give me a thumbs up, Jesse, to let me know that that's working. Okay, perfect. Thank you. So welcome, everybody. It is really just an honor, and I'm so excited to be able to kick us off this morning, this afternoon, this evening, wherever you all are, with some foundational concepts and ground us all for the presentations that you're going to hear a little bit later on. As Jesse mentioned, I'm presenting on behalf of my colleague Avi, who couldn't be here today, but we often present as a team, and we actually wanted to start this presentation with some thank yous. This work that we're going to talk about, we've been collaborating for almost 15 years now, and the work that I'll discuss really could not have happened without some incredible colleagues, faculty members, collaborators, teachers, students, museum educators, curators, lots of people who have really informed our thinking, colleagues in our own discipline of educational psychology, but also colleagues in other disciplines who've really stretched our thinking and allowed us to join their projects as co-designers and researchers and consultants. So thank you. If you're watching now or watching the recording, thank you so much. I also want to thank the sponsors of our work. So the Lemelson Center, obviously the Lemelson Foundation, but also the National Science Foundation. NOAA has sponsored some of this work. The Library of Congress has sponsored some of this work, and other agencies as well. And so we just want to express that although the views that we present here are our own, we're really truly grateful for the support that we have been able to gather. So I also want to add a couple more thank yous, because for me, the connections between learning and identity exploration are so near and dear to my own experience as a learner, as a teacher, and as a mum. So I want to thank, first of all, my own parents and my own family, and also the teachers that have been so informative in my life. But I want to thank these two here. These are actually my own children, pictured here, who have engaged with me in countless moments of learning in classrooms, museums, and cultural institutions. You won't see my children in the rest of the slides, but I can preview one of the key points that we'll be making today, which is that we have multiple role identities, and sometimes it's the co-activation of those role identities that can actually lead to significant breakthroughs, changes, growth, and development for us as individuals. And here are my two. So on the left-hand side, this is an older picture of my daughter. She's kind of grown up now, but she's actually at Monticello, if any of you have ever been, and she is reenacting making some dinner at Monticello. And the sign there says, fathers, mothers, grandparents, aunts, uncles, and children would all gather around the comfort of the fire at night. So she is learning and reenacting or enacting the role identity of someone making a meal as it would have been. And then on the right-hand side, that is a picture of my son, also a little outdated, but when he had the opportunity to do some glass blowing at the Chrysler Museum down in Norfolk here in Virginia, where I'm located. And so he is learning, but also taking on a role identity as an artist and a glass blower that was new for him at the time. So to zoom out just a little bit and hopefully have you think about this for yourself, I want you to think for a moment about your own experiences in educational and cultural settings. And these can be formal educational settings, such as a classroom. or a workshop or a symposium like this, but also think about informal or non-formal learning settings that you've been in. And these could be museums, they could be cultural institutions, it could be a historic site that you've been to. Have you learned about objects or artifacts, events, places, and people? And if you feel comfortable doing so, I'd love for you to just put in the chat just maybe one or two things that you might have learned or experienced, something about an object or an event or a place or a person or a group of people that you have learned about as a result of being in a learning environment. So while you're thinking about that, or while you're typing away in the chat, I want to ask a slightly different question. While you're in a learning setting, formal, informal setting, have you ever come to see the world differently because of that experience? Have you ever come to see the world a little bit differently or a lot differently because you've been somewhere or you have learned about something? Maybe you've been to a science museum or you've been to a historical site. How has that changed the way that you see the world? Have you taken information from that setting and used it to see the world differently? And again, if you feel moved to do so, I would welcome comments in the chat. And then the last question I have for you for now is, have you come to see yourself differently because of those experiences? Have you thought about yourself differently in the future, in a current different setting because of the setting that you're in? And if so, and you feel comfortable sharing, you could go ahead and put that in the chat too. And the three questions don't have to be answered with the same location, right? Could be different places, different times. Where have you come to see yourself differently and understood yourself differently, or committed to doing something differently because of those experiences? I see some action in the chat here. So what we're going to do today is I'm going to ground us in this particular talk with two sort of frameworks that Avi and I and our collaborators have used to conceptualize learning and role identity exploration, or this relationship between learning and our identities in educational settings. And so the first one I'm going to talk about is called Visitor Identification and Engagement with STEM, or VINES. And the second one that I'm going to introduce is the one that Jesse alluded to earlier, the Dynamic Systems Model of Role Identity, or as we call it, the DSMRI. And we'll talk through both and hopefully have the opportunity to do some Q&A as well. So let's think about that first one, about VINES. And so here's the background or the premise behind it, is that learning is often associated with the acquisition of knowledge and skills in a domain or a subject area. So if I was to say, and we often say this to our young family members, right? What did you learn in school today? But what did you learn the last time you were in a workshop or a professional development setting? Oftentimes that's focused on a concept or content, or if it's a museum setting, then it could be an artifact that the visitor had learned something about. And here's a little cartoon graphic of a visitor. And in this setting, the visitor is at a museum exhibition that is about sports, and it has a sports history and technology focus to it, this exhibition. And what this visitor is looking at is, this is actually became a snurfer, which became the snowboard. if any of you are familiar with the sport of snowboarding, this is an example of one of the very first attempts to create such a sports item that would allow you to move across the snow. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. But so from a learning perspective, this individual might be thinking about or learning about what were the materials that were made, that this is made from. These are two skis that are connected together. They've been bound together. Well, how did that happen? What was the material that was, that was used to do that? What were they made of? How big were they? Who could use them? That kind of thing. But that's very much a learning-oriented perspective. But in our work in the Vines framework, we also support people to consider how learning changes the way that they view the world. And so, for example, in this case, this individual, having learned a story, this true story about how Sherman Poppen created the early snowboard or the snurfer by taking two skis from his garage and binding them together because he needed to solve the problem of what to do on a snow day for his family. Once the visitors learn that information, maybe they start looking at their own garage or YMCA sports equipment room or school equipment room. Maybe they look at that a little bit differently and they think, well, maybe I could use the items that are lying around and I could combine them in a new way in order to solve a problem. So that's the sort of seeing the world differently. This individual is now looking at the world as an opportunity to solve a problem that could create fun. It could create a sport or an activity. But we also provide opportunities for people to think about themselves. So the focus of this individual's engagement has started with content, gone through seeing the world differently, but now they're thinking, well, maybe I am an inventive person. Maybe I am someone who can solve a problem. And so what they're thinking about here is creating a new sport. This individual seems to have a stick of some kind, a hockey stick, that they've got two balls, and they're developing a new sport that they can use to pass the time with their friends. And so that's really sort of the essence of this Vines framework, is we're thinking about where is the visitor's internal attention? Are they really thinking about content? Are they using that content and leveraging that content to think about the world differently? And can we help them think about themselves differently? So these are the foci, the three sort of different foci. Think of it as a continuum, where on the left-hand side, we have the visitors focus on the content, which really is oftentimes where we land as educators, right? We're staying in that world of teaching content or teaching an idea. And what we want to do is be able to move or design for that movement to have the visitor or the learner take that information and see the world differently, which as our collaborator and colleague Kevin Pugh might characterize as a transformative experience, being able to see the world differently because of the content that you've learned in an educational setting, and then see yourself differently. So the question is, once we sort of think about expanding this idea of engagement, how do we design for flexible movement along this continuum, especially if we might not always have someone there, as a facilitator or a docent to do that? So what Avi and I have done and our colleagues have done, is try to generate some design principles for learning and identity exploration in these types of spaces. And so the first thing that we would encourage, if we were faced with this as a dilemma, as a problem to solve, right, is to reframe concepts as relevant, interesting ideas that have the potential to change how the person sees the world and sees their roles within it. So what does that look like? Here's an example. So this is Sherman Poppen, who in the mid-1960s had to, at short notice, come up with a way to entertain his family on a snow day, and used old skis that he had to create what he called a snurfer for his family. So from a design perspective, we're telling a story, and we're turning the content of just the skis into possibility for something that could happen outside of that context. And so in the middle, when we're supporting thinking about the self and the content or the artifact, We want the idea of the content and the self to become explicit at the same time in that learning environment, and also be easily imagined in another future environment. So the way that we do this, because sometimes and through our own research, we have noticed that people don't tend to do this spontaneously. They need support, they need scaffolds to be able to do this. And so we use a lot of questions. So what settings might call for using items around you to solve a problem? This could be a question that could be posted alongside the story of Sherman Poppen, for example. And then moving across to identity exploration and focus on the self, we're really asking how the person can spontaneously see the role of themselves in that environment and outside of that environment. And so we again might use a question, what sport could you invent with everyday items? So when you put all of these things together, we sort of package them together as a set of design principles. And so the first step, if you're thinking about designing a learning context, is to think about what the key contexts might be, or the big ideas, if you like. And then we walk through sort of a 3-step process of reframing, reseeing, and then reenacting. So the first step in reframing the concept as an interesting assertion or an idea that might resonate with that person and help them to see the content as part of a bigger idea or a bigger story. Oftentimes that's in the form of an assertion, such as everyone is inventive, for example, or everyone can be a problem solver. And then what we want to do is, with our messaging in that space, create a sense of anticipation and help them to build relevance. But the person builds the relevance. This is not didactic. This is supporting the person to come up with their own subjective construction of that relevance. And then we help them re-see. We want to support attention to both the self and the idea, and model re-seeing the world using this big idea. Model it explicitly in that learning space, and then prompt re-seeing the self by supporting some action in that role. And it's important to say, and I'll touch on this a little bit later, but to do this in such a way that the individual feels emotionally, psychologically, physically safe to do so. That they're stepping outside of their comfort zone, for example. How do we do that and also feel safe and secure to do that? And then the third thing is to reenact. We encourage action in those spaces. It could be verbal action. It could be essentially cognitive action of thinking differently, but it could also be physical action, as I showed you with my children in those first pictures, and as you'll see in the other presentations to come. So think about the person re-seeing the world, re-seeing their role in it in relation to their own actions, their ideas, and maybe promoting commitment to one of those new ideas. And then promoting reflection afterwards, creating opportunities to articulate those big ideas and those commitments. So the presentations that you're going to see and hear about in the rest of this symposium will touch on, or 3 of them anyway, will touch on these design principles. Shortly, you will hear from Eric Hintz and Nisa Booning about Change Your Game and about Spark Lab. Those are spaces at the National Museum of American History. And they drew on the design principles that I just talked about. And then also later on, we'll hear from Chantel Landry and Andrea Rocchio from the Mariners Museum here in Southeastern Virginia about how they incorporated it into environmental stewardship programs. So while Vines provides design principles for designing environments that encourage people to shift the focus of their engagement dynamically, from learning about content to transforming beliefs about the world to exploring themselves, their own identities, such a design creates a shift in the meaning and the focus of being in that environment. What does it mean to be a museum visitor or a student or a teacher or a program participant? And so to conceptualize this type of engagement and its dynamic change among diverse individuals, we use a model that explains people's engagement as based in their subjective meaning of who they are in a role in the environment, or what we call their role identity. And the model that I'll talk about now, is the Dynamic Systems Model of Role Identity, or by its acronym, DSMRI. So as a basic premise, the DSMRI explains people's action as based in the social cultural role that they hold in a situation. We view the situation as a cultural activity system, a shared cultural schema or understanding of a situation. It includes the purpose of the situation, the roles within the situation, and the norms and the scripts for behavior in the different roles. So for example, a restaurant is a cultural activity system with roles such as hostess or waiter or chef or patron. A classroom is a cultural activity system with the roles of teacher and student. The street is a cultural activity system with roles such as a pedestrian and a driver. A shop is a cultural activity system with roles such as a seller and a shopper. And a museum is a cultural activity system with roles of visitor, docent, curator, other roles. So throughout the day, each of us moves between cultural activity systems, entering systems and roles that provide a first level of influence on the way that we act and think about ourselves. So actually, this webinar, this symposium, is a cultural activity system with norms and roles that include presenters, such as myself, and audience members, such as you. And right now, you as the audience are all behaving relatively similarly because you will occupy the role of audience members in the symposium. And there are physical, technological affordances and constraints and cultural norms for how to act in this role. So I'm currently behaving differently than you are because I have a different role in this activity system and situation. But the fact that people share a role and act in a similar way doesn't mean that people act identically. So people are not identical in the way that they inhabit or act in that social cultural role. So each of you, us, forms a subjective interpretation of who we are in that role in this situation. It is our role identity. And while role identities in a specific role, like a webinar audience participant or a restaurant patron or a student, have shared cultural characteristics, each person also imbues their role identity with their unique and idiosyncratic interpretation. And so the DSMRI suggests that this role identity behaves like a complex system with different elements that operate together to constitute a dynamic and continuously emerging personal interpretation and action. And so put simply, a complex dynamic system is one that can be scientifically studied, but must be considered probabilistically with more or less likely outcomes rather than with certainty due to uniform inputs and outputs. And using principles and concepts from complex dynamic systems allows us to reflect this probabilistic and not uniform nature of human behavior within a particular situation. It allows us to design environments that suit particular groups of people so that we can anticipate but not dictate or predict with certainty how people might learn, think, or feel in that interaction. In fact, it supports them to construct meaning in that learning environment and then construct themselves in the past, present, and future in that environment. So as I describe the model, I'd like you to think about a meaningful role that you have in life, or imagine the role identities of the people that you work with or study. Think about how these roles might develop over time. They might change and might relate in different ways to one another. So think of a role identity that you have. So the DSMRI has the basic premise that at any moment, a person acts to pursue goals, mostly implicit goals, in light of their interpretation of their reality and themselves in that reality. So the DSMRI describes emotion and action as emerging from a system with elements from 4 categories, and these are these 4 medium-sized circles inside this large circle. What in the model we call perceived reality of the situation, or what we call ontological and epistemological beliefs, self-perceptions and self-definitions, purposes and goals, and perceived action possibilities for pursuing these goals in light of that perceived reality or our beliefs and assumptions, and the perceptions of oneself within that reality. So these elements constitute a complex system, and we describe 3 interrelated facets: the role identity content, the role identity structure, and the role identity formation process. So the role identity content includes beliefs from the 4 partially overlapping categories. So the perceived lived reality includes knowledge and assumptions about the context, the people, and the content of that situation and the task. For example, theories, naive or formal theories that you've learned, informal assumptions that you might make about the situation, assumptions about causality or what might lead to what, the characteristics of the people around you, and assumptions about the nature of the topics and the subject domain. Purposes and goals includes the overall purpose that you want to pursue in that role. Is the purpose learning? Is it winning? Is it forming relationships? And the more specific goals and objectives that a person has for themselves and also for other people in that situation. Self-perceptions and self-definitions reflect self-perceived personal attributes such as perceived competencies, interests, personal values, physical characteristics, and perceived personality traits, as well as social identities such as ethnicity, gender, religion, language background, etc. And then perceived action possibilities include the covert and overt strategies and behaviors that the person perceives as being available to them to enact in the role and that situation to pursue their goals in light of their perceived reality and themselves within that reality. And each element also has emotion associated. So the identity structure facet, so that was the content facet, the structure facet concerns the harmony and tension between different content elements within each system category, and the alignment or misalignment between elements in the different categories of the system. The structure also reflects the integration or lack of integration of a focal role identity with other role identities that the person holds across their identity system that constitutes the overarching role of being a person in the world. So structural features like harmony and alignment and tensions and conflict are also associated with emotion. Often, although not always, harmony and alignment are associated with positive emotions, and tension and conflict among identity content are associated with negative emotion. When you feel conflicted, for example. The identity process concerns the ways by which the role identity forms and transforms the change in the content and the structural relations, the extent of the change, whether it is towards enhanced alignment and order or towards enhanced disorder and entropy, and the source of that change, whether it is controlled and conferred or agentic and exploratory. And that, to go back to connect with Binds, we're really designing to promote agentic identity exploration. So it comes from within the person, and the environment is supporting that exploration. Now, all of this is happening within a framework of the co-action of 4 what we call control parameters. One control parameter reflects the characteristics of the agent, often the individual person. So dispositions such as your temperament, your personality characteristics, the history of how you've been conditioned, and developmental readiness. The other 3 control parameters reflect characteristics of the environment or the cultural activity system. So social context and social interactions. And these are mediated by tangible semiotic cultural meanings and tools in a certain life domain. We have social context, we have the domain, and then we have the culture, the cultural facet. So the DSMRI can be applied to each and every one of us in the different cultural activity systems and roles within our lives to capture how each of us interprets who we are in that role and how this role continuously emerges as the cultural activity system unfolds. So to get further insight into this mode, consider, and you're welcome to drop this in the chat if you would like to, or just think about it for yourself. What is your role identity in this situation? How would you characterize it? How do you understand the situation that we're in, the cultural activity system? What are your purposes and goals? What personal characteristics of you are salient or important at this moment, important to you? What actions do you perceive as available and not available to you to pursue your goals in this situation? So do you experience alignment among these different components? Do you experience tension among these different components? What is it that's in tension? So have a think about that. And then also have a think about how the cultural activity system is framing your role identity. This is a symposium or the cultural activity system that you're thinking about when you've identified that focal role identity. How does that frame what you think your role is in that situation? So we apply the DSMRI to understand the role identities that people form and bring to different environments. And when we're designing educational programs, whether they are in formal or informal settings, we consider how environmental design can support people in transferring learning about content and about the world and about themselves into other role identities in their lives that they might occupy in other cultural activity systems or contexts. That is one of our main educational goals. And so on this slide, we have the DSMRI, but the DSMRI guided research is really aimed at helping people learn and consider things in one context and then shift them into another context. So for example, in a teacher professional development program, and you're going to hear about one of those that uses the DSMRI to understand the experiences of its participants a little bit later on, people occupy the role identity of a program participant. They're also a teacher, but the goal for them is to transfer what they learn about the content and about the world and what they learn about themselves to their role identity from program participant to teacher, and not just in the cultural activity system of the professional development workshop or institute, but back in the cultural activity system of their school and of their classroom. So the Vine's design principles that involve promoting people's construction of self-relevance of the content, it encourages reframing of that content of big ideas that are relevant to your identity and triggering identity-related questions in ways that combine creating a sense of safety, such as identity questions to re-see the world, re-see yourself in it, but also scaffolding actions to reenact roles, whether that's in a museum exhibition or a professional development program. It's aiming to facilitate people's learning of content, transforming beliefs about the world, and also exploring and transforming beliefs about themselves to transfer that into other activity systems and other roles in their lives. And to do that, we use design-based. So the upcoming presentation will describe some of these other cultural activity systems and role identities in different contexts and programs, from the Change Your Game exhibition and the Spot Class Invention Education space at the National Museum of American History, to the I Am a Mariner program at the Mariners Museum and Park, to the Teacher Professional Development program on teaching difficult histories by our colleagues at Old Dominion University and Virginia Commonwealth University. And if you're interested, you might want to snap a picture or grab these references. These are the sort of canonical references for the Vine's framework and for the DSMRI. And with that, I'm going to see if I can stop sharing and invite Jessie to come back up.
I'm back. Good work, Mr. Morris, on the technical hopscotch. Joanna, thank you so much for the wonderful presentation and setup I want to quickly kind of restate what I put in the chat and acknowledge this group for an incredible diversity, which I should have expected no less. When you go from a Lakota sweat lodge to a Japanese internment camp to a Dust Bowl exhibition in terms of people's reflections and ideas around different role identities, you know you're in a very eclectic and learned group. So thank you all. Keep it coming. It will really help as we land in this section with the other talks. Joanna, we have a question that came through. I'm going to read it exactly as it came through from Billy Van Leuven. I can't see your institution, Billy, but thank you for putting your question in. I'm going to read it now. If a person sees themselves as a certain kind of person, for example, a scientist, how does this fit into the DSMRI? On the one hand, it seems to be the emergent self-concept at the intersection of all the components of the identity system. But on the other hand, it seems like it could also just be a self-perception that is nestled within the identity system. Or is it perhaps both? Great question, Mr. Van Leuven.
Yeah, thank you so much for your question. And there's a lot in that question. And I'll try.
Let me know if you want me to restate any of it.
No, I have the question. So it's a great question. So it's kind of a both and. So you can have a core sort of self-perception as being a person who is a scientist. That's one of your primary sort of ways that you would define yourself. So that's a self-definition, right? But it's also going to depend on the particular role that you're inhabiting in a cultural activity system. And I'll give you an example. So early on in our research with the DSMRI, we were talking with a group of science teachers, and some of them were career switches. And so they had actually been scientists or engineers prior to becoming high school teachers, high school science teachers. And some of them felt very strongly that they were a scientist. That was how they defined themselves. And so what was challenging for them in some ways, but also enjoyable for them in some ways, was to share their beliefs and assumptions, their ontological and epistemological beliefs that were of a scientific worldview with their students. So they had a purpose and goal of exciting the students and transferring that worldview for the students with action possibilities such as doing science, right? Doing science experiments. And so the scientist role identity that was in the past was very much also in the present for those people, but it also was in coming into their science teacher role identity. And that actually sometimes created some challenges, because being a science teacher, you have different perceived action possibilities and different purposes and goals than you do sometimes as a scientist. And so it's not just the role identity separate from the context and the setting. It very much depends on that cultural activity system or context that a scientist, for example, in a high school science classroom, cultural activity system, would perhaps have the same self-perceptions and self-definitions, but might have different purposes and goals and different action possibilities and feel differently about it when they're in that science high school classroom versus in a science lab. So I hope that sort of makes sense. It's kind of a both and phenomena, if that makes sense. I see myself as a researcher, but I'm also an educator. And so which one is perhaps more prominent for me might depend on the cultural activity system, but neither one goes away.
Thank you, Joanna. I remember having this very conversation with Avi the very first time we sat together and talked about it. And it's a fascinating element to the discussion. So thank you again, Billy, for introducing it and for acknowledging that you gave a good answer, Dr. Garner. So we have about 5 minutes until we begin a break. So I'm going to take another question that we got. And I love it for the spirit and for the directness of it. And it's from an anonymous contributor. And it is, when we think of identity, we often think of race, gender, class, sexual orientation, etc. How does the DSMRI intersect with those kind of traditional notions of identity?
Yeah, so it's complex. I just want to, begin with that. So when we do work with the DSMRI, oftentimes we're asking people, how do they describe themselves, rather than how would I describe someone else, for example. So it's really about how that person sees themselves. And when we ask people about themselves, oftentimes they will use what we call a social identity characteristic. That could be race, ethnicity, gender, nationality, something like that, as a social identity characteristic. That would go into the self-definitions, the self-perceptions and self-definitions circle within the DSMRI, and then how that plays out in the cultural activity system and in the enactment and the development and the change of that role identity is likely to depend on both the individual's past and present construction of the relative salience of those characteristics in that situation, and how that situation supports or doesn't support the individual to express or be mindful of those characteristics, depending on how they choose to do so, if that makes sense.
It does. It does. And what I'm going to do now, as a way to transition us into a 5-minute break, which we're going to take from 12:55 Eastern until 1 Eastern, is I'm going to pose a question that I'm not asking you to answer, but I'm going to ask those in the chat and those in the session to think about, knowing that many of us are educators and practitioners. And the reason I'm asking this question is to set us up for the following two discussions, which are coming from Mr. Hintz and Miss Buning. And that is, how do we as teachers, museum professionals, enrichment educators, folks working in education, create spaces and environments where people feel comfortable trying on new versions of themselves and exploring those ideas? How are we currently doing it? How might we reflect on how we can do it given what we're learning today? So that is everyone's homework for the next 5 minutes, is to think about that. I think the idea here is that we will maybe just kind of go camera off and give everybody 5 minutes to do what they need to do. And then I'll be back on in 5 minutes and we'll get going again. Please stay with us. We'll be back. It'll just be 5 quick minutes. And hi, Emma. Welcome back, everyone. Thank you for staying with us. We are moving from coffee break / bathroom break / moment of Zen to session 2, which is where we will take the theory that Joanna took us through directly onto the Smithsonian's National Museum of American History Lemelson Center floor. We're going to have 2 different talks within this next session. So what I'll do is introduce each talk and then the presenter before they actually come on and address the group. The first talk is going to be about Change Your Game and the exhibit that Joanna referenced, and specifically about its exploration of inventive identity as part of the exhibit. It's going to be given by my dear friend, Mr. Eric Hintz, who you met earlier. I will now read Eric's bio and ask him to join me on the screen. Mr. Eric S. Hintz, Dr. Hintz, is a historian and the acting director for the Lemelson Center, as you already heard. And his research explores the history of invention, innovation, and research and development. He's the author of American Independent Inventors in an Era of Corporate R&D, the co-editor of Does America Need More Inventors, and co-editor of Inventing for Sports, which was very recently released and maps to Change Your Game. Shout out and plug to go get that book, which is free and available to everybody here, again, called Inventing for Sports. And in March 2024, he and his teammates opened the Change Your Game exhibit that we're going to learn more about in just a moment, which is a bilingual exhibition that helps visitors cultivate their inventive identities by exploring the role of invention and technology in sports. Eric earned his Master of Arts and PhD in the History and Sociology of Science from the University of Pennsylvania. My friend, Mr. Hintz, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Jesse. Give me a thumbs up or yes, sir, if you guys can see the slides. Okay, fantastic. All right, let's just get the Zoom Command Center figured out here. All right. Very good. Well, again, thank you, Jesse. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning to everyone. Delighted to be presenting some of our work here at today's symposium. And as Jesse mentioned, I'll be describing how we applied the DSMRI and Vine's frameworks to foster inventive identity exploration in an exhibition called Change Your Game that explores the role of invention and technology in sports. Change Your Game is located at the Smithsonian's National Museum of American History on the National Mall here in Washington, D.C. The museum includes several well-known objects, such as Abe Lincoln's stovepipe hat, Dorothy's ruby slippers from the Wizard of Oz movie, the Star-Spangled Banner. We've got all kinds of great stuff, and we get about 3 to 4 million in-person visitors per year. Within the museum, the exhibition was developed by our team at the Lemelson Center for the Study of Invention and Innovation. In addition to studying the history of invention in the United States, a big part of our educational mission is to inspire the next generation of inventive problem solvers. We do this by engaging in a full range of public history activities, including developing interactive exhibitions like Change Your Game. And gosh, going back to like 2019 or 2020, we invited Joanna Garner and Avi Kaplan to be consultants to the project to help us achieve some of our educational goals. And I should also acknowledge our design partner. So we worked with a group called Roto, R-O-T-O, based out of Columbus, Ohio. And they're a really great design and fabrication shop that works with lots of museums, science centers, aquariums, things like that. So everything you see here in the next few photos and images was designed with the input from Joanna and Avi and designed and constructed by Roto. Often when we have big exhibitions here at the museum, we'll contract out with a different firm. Okay, so let's see. There we go. As Joanna mentioned, my talk is the first of 2 in this session on the idea of activating the inventive identities of our visitors, especially young people. I'll be discussing how we apply DSMRI and Vine's principles to scaffold inventive identity exploration in an unstaffed, unfacilitated exhibition gallery. And in just a few minutes, my teammate Nissa will describe how we foster inventive identity exploration in a facilitated, staffed education space called Spark Lab, which is located right next door to Change Your Game at NMAH. So, Change Your Game, Cambia tu Juego, is a 3,500 square foot, family-friendly, interactive, fully bilingual exhibition that explores the role of invention and technology in sports. The exhibition opened in March 2024 with financial support from terrific partners such as the National Science Foundation, the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office, Nike, our friends at the Lemelson Foundation, and a few other supporters. It will be on display through at least 2030, so come check it out. Change Your Game includes 6 areas of exploration as shown in this floor plan. The starting line, which you can see here, welcomes visitors and introduces the exhibition. Next, 4 motivation zones highlight the core inspirations for invention in sports, achieving a competitive edge, promoting health and safety, facilitating fairness and accuracy in officiating, and ensuring that the games are inclusive and fun for everyone. Finally, the end zone experience includes several interactives that encourage visitors to explore their inventive identities. And I'll say much more about each of these interactives here later in the talk. The exhibition shares stories of diverse scientists, athletes, and inventors who changed the game. And it inspires visitors, especially young people, to see themselves as inventive problem solvers in their everyday lives. We developed Change Your Game with a few priority audiences in mind, including girls and young women ages 10 to 17, African American youth and other people of color ages 10 to 17, people with disabilities, and Spanish-speaking Latinx visitors. Now, anybody can enjoy Change Your Game, but we designed the gallery with these priority audiences in mind because they tend to be underrepresented among inventors, engineers, and other STEM professionals. Overall, our educational goals are to encourage visitors to recognize their own inventive and problem-solving abilities, to inspire STEM-based learning, and to broaden visitors' perceptions of who can be inventive and what counts as invention. So with that background in mind, I'll focus the remainder of my talk around 3 big questions. 1, what is inventive identity? 2, how do we design for inventive identity activation in an unfacilitated exhibition gallery? And 3, does it work? And I'll answer that last question by sharing some results from our visitor focus groups and evaluations. Okay, so what is inventive identity? If we use the language of DSMRI, inventive identity is a person's network of inventive related beliefs, goals, self-perceptions, emotions, and possible actions oriented toward creative solutions for complex problems. In short, I like to think of inventive identity as when a person sees themselves as a creative problem solver. The DSMRI framework teaches us that we can all assume multiple roles in our lives. So right now I'm embodying the role of museum curator, but tonight when I head home, I'll embody the role of husband and dad. And as DSMRI teaches us, we can use the malleability of our shifting dynamic role identities to our educational advantage. So our challenge for the exhibition was this: can a person visiting our museum and embodying the role of a passive museum visitor enter the Change Your Game exhibition, interact with our content, and dynamically shift their role identity to an active visitor exploring their inventiveness? In short, can an exhibition like Change Your Game activate someone's inventive identity? To do this, Change Your Game could not be a traditional exhibition where the visitor passively absorbs information about people, events, and artifacts. Rather, by deploying the Vines model that Joanna described in our design process, we strove to draw the visitor into active, self-reflective engagement with the content. So while the exhibition is about invention, technology, and sports, it is also about the visitor's own transformation. Okay, so the goal of the exhibition, again, is for visitors to see themselves as inventors. But what exactly does it mean to be inventive? So, we've been studying these ideas for years at the Lemelson Center, And so there are a few things that we wanted folks to understand or just sort of embody as they take on this new role. So first, we wanted visitors to understand that invention is not just a discrete eureka moment, but rather an iterative process in which inventors engage in creative brainstorming, research, sketching, prototyping, experimenting, tweaking their designs, and sharing their ideas with the world. And you can kind of see that iterative process embodied in the it statements there on the left. Going deeper, we also wanted visitors to learn about the inventive behaviors and habits of mind embodied by the inventors we showcased in the exhibition, and then prompt the visitors to adopt those mindsets and actively practice those behaviors in the gallery. So what are some of those mindsets and habits? They include leveraging frustration with the status quo to develop a better solution, tweaking and adapting existing designs to make something new, drawing on creative play to develop new inventions, sketching, of course, designing with certain constraints, and optimizing performance by iterating on a design. So, these are the kinds of things that we know inventors do, and we wanted our visitors to actually do them in the exhibition. Okay, so with that goal in mind, let's look at how we designed for those educational goals and how we designed that into the exhibition itself. Okay, so the Vines-inspired focus on the visitor begins as soon as they enter the gallery. Originally, we were calling the exhibition Game Changers, but as we leaned into the DSMRI and Vines frameworks, we decided we needed to change the exhibition, and we decided to call it Change Your Game, so that the emphasis is on you, the visitor. The gallery entrance panel immediately prompts visitors to see themselves as inventors. So it asks, who can be a game changer, and answers anyone. Who is a game changer? You are. How will you change your game? So all throughout the gallery, you'll see this sort of emphasis on you and your. We also included inventive identity language directly into the label text. Our goal was to have visitors learn from an inventor's experience and then transform that into a call to action. So for example, the competitive edge zone describes how professional snowboarder Shannon Dunn channeled her frustration with riding on standard snowboards, which tended to be sized for men. She worked with her sponsor Burton to co-design the Dolphin 44, a snowboard with a specific shape and smaller size that works better for women. The label text ends with a question and a call to action for the visitor. When something isn't designed with you in mind, how could you make it more usable? So again, turning it not just, we're not just passively learning about the artifact, we're wanting you to sort of engage with it and think about what it might mean to you. So here, Dunn's story in the label text introduces visitors to the inventive strategies of leveraging frustration and then adapting existing inventions. And then it invites the visitor rather, to consider how they could do this in their own lives. In a similar way, the Fun for Everyone motivation zone features a double Dutch jump rope machine dreamed up in childhood by engineering student and inventor Tahira Reed. Reed grew up in the Bronx, jumping the two-rope double Dutch style in the 1980s. She would occasionally become frustrated when she could not find two friends to turn the ropes. So when she was in third grade, Reed drew a picture of an automated double Dutch jump roping machine for an elementary school poster contest, and she won first prize. So for a few years, Reed's idea lay dormant, but then later, as an undergraduate at Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, she was inspired to return to her childhood idea and actually build it while taking a popular class called Introduction to Engineering Design. The panel here shows Reed testing out her prototype in college. It also features her childhood sketch and the patent drawing of the jump rope machine. And the panel asked the visitor, what ideas do you have for inventions, not only in sports, but in other parts of your life? So Reed's story and the panel introduce visitors to several different inventive strategies, most prominently drawing on creative play. So play can also often lead to creativity and invention. And sketching, she sketched this idea when she was in third grade. And then, it invites the visitor to sort of learn from those ideas from Reed and then apply it to themselves. And it invites visitors to brainstorm their own ideas. In addition to traditional artifacts and images and labels, each zone also features an interactive kiosk. The safety remix activity in the health and safety zone, shown here, whimsically invites visitors to think like an inventor by considering task constraints, iterating, and striking a balance between safety and performance. Here we can kind of see the user experience for the interactive. So, the visitor chooses between two challenges, either skateboarding or a snowball fight. The interactive then invites the visitor to choose protective gear for their head, body, and legs. And the goal here is to be safe without diminishing performance. So some of the choices make sense, like standard wrist and elbow pads. Other choices are a little more ridiculous, like bubble wrap or a fireman's jacket, or there's another screen that shows like a suit of armor, that kind of thing. So it's pretty whimsical. And depending on the visitor's selections, the avatar either performs some cool skateboarding trick or they wipe out. So the visitor, in doing this, learns about the pros and cons of bubble wrap or wrist guards or the fireman's jacket with respect to safety and performance. Okay, well, the fireman's jacket is really safe. You're not going to scrape your elbow, but it's kind of hard to do tricks, right? So maybe a little bit obvious, but through this interactive, visitors practice two inventive skills. It's the idea that you design solutions with certain constraints, and you also optimize performance by iterating and tweaking your design. Here's the end zone, and it includes 3 concluding experiences that encourage visitors to explore their inventive identities. I'll go through each one. First, a video encourages visitors to apply their inventive identity beyond the gallery in their everyday lives in domains beyond sports. The video reinforces some of the key educational messages: that everyone is inventive, that invention is an iterative process, and most importantly, that you, the visitor, are inventive. The video then invites visitors to consider what they might want to invent to make life safer, to help the planet, or to have more fun. So again, it's the idea that we've shown you a bunch of inventions in sports. Now we're sort of broadening out to your life, to your experience. A second interactive, called Be a Game Changer, invites visitors to be self-reflective about their own inventive identities while reminding visitors that there are many different ways to be an inventor. The activity station asks visitors to think about everyday activities that can be inventive, such as playing, exercising, cooking, helping. It then asks about various roles that visitors might identify with. Do you consider yourself a worker, a team member, a leader, or maybe an advocate? Finally, it asks visitors to consider their inventive strategies and how they like to get things done: by sketching, by team building, by tinkering, by imagining. The interactive then concludes by reminding visitors that the things you do every day are inventive. And then it presents a word cloud titled Inventive Me, consisting of the different activities, roles, and strategies that the visitor selected on the earlier screens. So through this interactive, each visitor leaves with a more refined sense of their unique inventive identity. The final experience in the gallery is called What Will You Invent? This interactive prompts visitors with a rotating set of open-ended questions like, what is a problem you were passionate about? Or what is a problem you solved recently? Visitors are invited to write or sketch responses on paper and drop them in a secure box. The exhibition team vets and posts the most interesting responses as inspiration for future visitors. Now, it's a little hard to see this drawing on the pink sheet of paper, but one young visitor responded, quote, "I would invent a flying car so people don't have to go through traffic." And again, hard to see, but the sketch shows a flying car kind of zooming over the traffic here at the bottom. And this invention idea is a little fanciful and it may not be super plausible, but that's really not the salient point. This young visitor, or any visitor who takes the time to earnestly sketch an idea, is no longer a passive museum visitor. Rather, this visitor has made an identity shift and now embodies the role of inventor just by sketching an idea. Okay, so last slide here. In conclusion, it's important to ask, does it work? Does the DSMRI and Vines-inspired approach to content in Change Your Game help activate visitors' inventive identities? Happily, the answer is yes. Thanks to our National Science Foundation grant, we were able to conduct a robust summative evaluation of the exhibition. Kira Collective, a museum evaluation firm, spoke to 164 visitors through interactions with walk-up visitors and invited focus groups with our priority audiences. Joanna Garner and Avi Kaplan likewise conducted in-depth observations and structured interviews with 6 visitors from our priority audiences, and there were a few key findings. First, visitors understood that invention is integral to sports. They also understood that invention is relevant in their own lives. Visitors came to understand also that invention is pursued not just by sort of unattainable geniuses, but by ordinary people solving ordinary problems in their everyday lives. And most importantly, we found that half of our young visitors, ages 10 to 17, said they felt more inventive after seeing the exhibition. So Joanna and Avi developed a simple but pretty clever way to measure this. They created 2 coin-sized circles, one that reads an inventive person, one that reads me. They invited the visitors to overlap the 2 circles before entering the gallery and then after. A greater degree of overlap after visiting the gallery meant that the exhibition made an impact in activating, or at least enhancing, that visitor's inventive identity. So, it was gratifying for us as an exhibition team to read some of these quotations from visitors, and we're proud that the Change Your Game exhibition helps inspire our visitors to see themselves a little differently and be game changers in their everyday lives. So, with that, we've reached the finish line. I had to show this image of a razor-thin photo finish provided by Lynx, makers of one of the world's best photo finish cameras that we feature in the exhibition. So thank you so much for tuning in. After Nissa's talk, I will look forward to answering some of your questions. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Eric. I have to note that that picture was taken in 2003. So for those of us who are fans of Premier League and international soccer and struggle through how VAR can continue to be so ineffective, it's pretty phenomenal that this existed more than 20 years ago and was down to this level of detail. Thank you, Eric, for a fascinating discussion about Change Your Game. At the risk of inserting myself too much, I just want to mention that I joined the advisory committee for this exhibit in 2017, and I was around when we made the shift that Eric talked about to Change Your Game. And I was around when Joanna and Avi were first brought on to think about DSMRI and inventive identity and everything we've talked about here. And it's so wonderful, Eric and team, to see that you're still walking the walk, because when that decision was made to have the exhibit be intentionally curating reflection from individuals on their identity, and now we're here in a session today with our peers taking them through exactly that. It's just a fantastic example of walking the walk and being very connected to your mission. So kudos to you. For an incredible exhibit and for a very thoughtful approach to programming, which I will say, having been in this space for 20, 25 years, is not necessarily a given. My distinct honor and pleasure at this point is to bring my colleague and friend, Nissa Buning, back up. And Nissa will be doing part 2 of this session, where she'll be taking us directly into SparkLab. And I'm going to let her talk more about what SparkLab is. And as Eric mentioned, discussing how we're going from translating inventive identity exploration in the exhibit itself to a facilitated learning environment. Nissa, she's already with me on camera, so she doesn't need to start her video now, but I'm going to read her bio. She's an informal educator who has spent her career working to connect children and families with experiences to broaden perspectives and designing and implementing professional development to support those goals. As head of invention education for the Lemelson Center of the Study of Invention and Innovation at the National Museum of American History, excuse me, Nissa manages a suite of programs designed to support inventiveness in everyone. This includes SparkLab, a place where visitors practice their inventiveness through hands-on, open-ended challenges at the National Museum of American History in DC, and the SparkLab Network, which is comprised of 9 sites throughout the US and abroad. Before she joined the Museum of American History, she worked in environmental and outdoor education throughout California, including 11 years with the Girl Scouts of Northern California. She holds an MA in Museum Studies and Certificate in Nonprofit Management from George Washington University. My friend, Miss Nissa Buning, the floor is now yours.
Thank you so much, Jesse. I really appreciate that intro, and I'm excited to chat with people today. I'm going to go ahead and get my presentation up and going. All right. So welcome, everyone. I'm so excited to be here to talk through some of the incredibly informative and for me transformative as an educator work that we've been doing here in the Lemelson Center and the National Museum of American History. So today I'll be talking about what the DSMRI and Vines framework look like in a facilitated space that is Spark Lab to explore inventive identity. So as we start, I want to acknowledge both Eric teed me up so well talking about the mission and ethos of the Lemelson Center writ largely through Change Your Game and Spark Lab. Many of those goals align across both of those spaces in terms of engaging in the process of invention and having our visitors leave seeing themselves as more inventive and capable of creative problem solving than when they came in. So my talk today is going to focus both on the product that we created through this process, but also the process that we used when we set out to say we want to create a tool to help us train staff and volunteers in really facilitating for identity exploration. That was a prototyping process. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about the product, but mostly about that process and our identities as educators. So as I start, I want to acknowledge a great team of people that worked primarily on this with us. We have our Spark Lab lead facilitators here. They're the folks in Spark Lab facilitating every day who also worked to design and study how our tool was implemented in Spark Lab and across other sites. I want to also acknowledge our participants in prototyping this, our volunteers in the Spark Lab in the National Museum of American History, as well as our Spark Lab network members across the country and abroad. So in Spark Lab, we provide a platform for visitors to develop the skills that inventors use in a drop-in setting. So you'll see some pictures here of what that looks like. Visitors come in and they may stay for 5 minutes, they may stay for 2 hours, and they're engaging in behaviors like communication and collaboration and perseverance in order to take their identities and their curiosities and interests and apply them to some of the challenges that we set. This can be a really interesting and sometimes challenging way for visitors to participate in a museum experience. Before we started on this, we knew a couple of things. Visitor curiosity drives the experience in Spark Lab, and we made intentional choices about how the materials design and facilitation both cue the visitor and tee them up to take a step and understand their role in Spark Lab. Here you'll see a couple of different pictures of what that looks like. You'll see help clean up the ocean, which is one of our activities. So the primary activity in Spark Lab is these open-ended challenges. We provide a prompt, help clean up the ocean, a few facilitation questions using these materials. What would you invent to clean plastic out of the ocean? And those materials you'll see there. The materials are often a mix of something familiar. So in Help Clean Up the Ocean, we have Tinker Toys and something unfamiliar. So we have nets, we have cords, we have foam tubes, we have all different kinds of things that the visitors can use. And when we design these activities, there's no specific way that we imagine them using these activities. From its beginning, Spark Lab has been a space where we are actively prototyping with our visitors. We talk about our activities, that they are prototypes when they hit the floor. They're not complete. They're sometimes never complete. And we are always learning from our visitors and learning from our experiences in order to increase those ways that visitors engage really creatively and inventively through our challenges. You'll also see in the other couple of pictures with folks in them that we challenge this idea that when you come in for a learning experience, what that sense of authority looks like and what that way that you engage looks like. So we're not wearing lab coats in Spark Lab. Our facilitators are wearing yellow aprons. There's no staff side of the table and visitor side of the table. Our tables are all set up so that we take away that idea that, well, here's where someone teaching stands and here's where someone learning stands. We're all learning and co-creating in the invention process together. So you'll see what that looks like in a couple of different ways. We've got that one picture where there's a lot of young inventors and some adult inventors as well participating in the invention process, and our staff as well. We defined success in Spark Lab through these 8 inventive habits of mind. And when we choose our activities, choose our infrastructure in Spark Lab, how we design the space, and look at facilitation, train our staff and volunteers, these are what defines a successful experience, is visitors practicing these skills. In Spark Lab, we believe that these are skills that you have to practice to improve, but that everyone inherently can do. And we choose the activities and the setup in Spark Lab to allow our visitors to engage in different ways with each of these 8 characteristics. As we started on this process to design a toolkit that would help our visitors explore their inventive identity, we looked at, well, how do we know inventive identity is successful in Spark Lab? And so here are a few examples of the verbal and behavioral indicators that we identified for what this looks like. We see verbs used, I wonder, let's try again. We see them participating in that iterative process, and we think about how can we prompt more of that through our challenges and materials and facilitation. We look at how visitors label their behavior. I'm working on my invention, my prototype, I'm an inventor. All of these things contribute to the way we define success of exploration of our visitors' inventive identity. And the third piece of what we used as we started on this process was some case studies done by Avi and Joanna in both our site in the National Museum of American History and in later down the road in the Morris Museum in New Jersey in their Spark Lab site. And these case studies used observation and stimulated recall to look at how our visitors engaged with the activities, the materials, how the facilitator intervention came into play as visitors explored different activities, and how the behaviors in those interactions could map back to the DSMRI and really create a complete picture of role identity exploration in Spark Lab. So I want to give you a few quotes from those case studies to really illustrate the starting point that we had for this development of a toolkit for facilitation in Spark Lab. So I'm reading from the case studies. S's engagement in the role of Spark Lab visitor began with a period of exploring action possibilities by examining the materials. Early on, she formulated a belief about the intended purpose of engagement. In her stimulated recall, she said, I was thinking that we were designing sports people, but I realized we're supposed to design creative things. In a separate case study, F recounted his goal, saying, I wanted it to go uphill using the pulley system, go down the hill. There would be a way to get the marble to the cup. At the hill part, it kept jumping. I was trying to get it into the cup. When asked why he had approached that activity, he revealed self-perceptions that transcended his Spark Lab visitor role identity, saying, "Because I like to create and do new challenges." So these case studies were incredibly helpful to us as we looked at how our visitors were already coming in with self-perceptions, perceived action possibilities, and their own goals, and how we in Spark Lab can design and facilitate intentionally to augment those. So as I said, as we developed this toolkit, we approached it as living our mission and exploring our own identity as facilitators and inventors of strategies that help our visitors become inventors. So we started off in a workshop in February 24 with our Invention education staff here at the National Museum of American History, co-led by Avi and Joanna, and looked at Spark Lab as a cultural activity system. And these are things, when we're working with our facilitators, we all have anecdotes. Someone comes in and says, "Is this a cafeteria? Or do I have to pay to come in here?" And looking at how our cues of infrastructure and staffing cue our visitors to think about themselves in an active role in Spark Lab. One of my favorite moments is opening a new Spark Lab site and watching kids just rush in, and they need no introduction and they need no invitation to start taking an active role in their experience. And it's really sometimes the adults who go, "Wait, what do I do here? How do I do it right?" And that magic comes alive when you're watching the kids and you realize that agency and that learning experience and that openness to it is really alive, and they're enthusiastically exploring their identities. So things we looked at are how do our visitors use the space? How do they explore the space? What social interactions influence the way they can explore their identity? We have visitors who are coming in family groups, alone, with school groups. We may have very busy times where this room you see is absolutely packed, or we may have much quieter times. And all of these factors influence the way we facilitate the experience. So as we embarked on this development, our goals were to create tools that allowed us to train staff and volunteers to facilitate in Spark Lab, intentionally to allow for inventive identity exploration. Through our first workshop with Avi and Joanna, our facilitation staff in Spark Lab identified the goal of observing visitor interactions and facilitated interactions in order to be able to identify how those interactions were showing up on the DSMRI model. And so you'll see here an observation sheet where our facilitators observed each other and the visitors, and then could write down what happened in an interaction, their perceptions of what happened in an interaction, and then the ways in which we identified the visitors' goals, beliefs about the activity, beliefs about themselves, possible action steps, and emotions. We also interviewed our volunteers in the Spark Lab space in Washington, D.C., in order to collect their recollections of impactful moments where they saw an inventive identity change happen, and look at how those connected to those 5 buckets as well. So from that first workshop, we developed a set of 10 tools, and as the facilitators in Spark Lab developed these tools, they identified a couple of different ways that they were thinking about them. These tools were designed in order to provide a training platform to our volunteers and our staff, and identify the broad ways in which quality facilitation based in inquiry happens in Spark Lab. And these are all things we do already, but that we wanted to label really explicitly and call out. Facilitation in Spark Lab isn't just asking questions. There's a lot of different ways that honor both different visitors' ways of interacting as well as facilitators' preferred ways of interacting that are all valid facilitation that encourages inventive identity exploration. So I'm going to go through these tools real quick, but if you're interested in learning more, I encourage you to reach out. We have, starting off, the importance of welcoming someone in the space and setting expectations. Hi, welcome to Spark Lab. This is where you get to be an inventor. And the power of stepping back as a facilitator and observing and allowing visitors to establish their authority and ownership over their experience without that reliance on, oh, well, you're staff here. What am I supposed to do? You tell me. As they get deeper into an experience in Spark Lab, here are 4 other tools that we rely on in order to have those conversations that further inventive identity, labeling actions as inventive, really praising the process of exploring your identity over necessarily making a product that works. I think inventors all feel that very deeply. Providing encouragement and knowing that our activities are designed to prompt frustration and failure and tweaking, and that our role is to intervene in those moments and do a bit of a debrief and see the learning that happens there, and collaboration as well. And finally, all of the different ways that we as facilitators in a museum can adapt and extend the experience, allowing visitors to see the rest of the museum through the lens of invention, looking at all of our different objects and all the objects in their daily lives as inventions that have solved a problem and a process in which they can participate in ways that interest them. You'll see here a graphic that specifically calls these things out, that facilitation looks different to a lot of different visitors and to facilitators as well. So we continued to prototype and hone our toolkit, see how it worked in different spaces through a workshop in April 2024 with our volunteers in the Washington, D.C. Spark Lab at National Museum of American History, and through our network of Spark Lab spaces in museums across the country and abroad. This has really allowed us an excellent chance to see how those tools function both through different facilitators in different times and spaces and across activities and social groups, as well as in different contexts. Our Spark Lab network sites are not only based in large history museums like we are here, but they might be in small history museums, science centers, libraries, all kinds of different community centers of learning. And so this was a really excellent way to continue prototyping and learning about these tools that we developed so that we can adjust them. So finally, this really helped us create a shared language amongst facilitators and allowed for these conversations to happen. You'll see here pictures of us at the Morris Museum in New Jersey running workshops on the toolkit in March of this year, 2025, and really continuing to learn about how these tools help us to promote inventive identity exploration in Spark Lab. And we're continuing to be excited about how all of these offer an opportunity for us to continue to learn more about role identity exploration writ large. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen.
Thank you, Nissa. As I mentioned before, it's incredible to see the connectivity between what's happening in the exhibit and what's happening in SparkLab. And having had the distinct honor of wearing one of those yellow aprons and stepping into the role identity of a SparkLab facilitator, I can say that it is a very unique space, and the work being done there is extraordinary. The toolkit in specific, and I have a hunch if there are educators, informal or otherwise, on this session, they're going to be asking for access to the toolkit. I know that the intent is to provide slides and resources to anybody who reaches out and asks for them. So if you're hearing this and you were thinking that, please be sure that you do connect with us, and we'll make sure that you get access to that. This is the point where we turn the opportunity to ask about what you've heard in the last two sessions to the group. Eric's coming back on now. Nissa is here. I don't see any questions in the chat or in the Q&A, but I will just give a quick 30 seconds, 60 seconds for anybody to put anything into the chat that they would like to see. And if I don't see anything, I will come up with a question in the time between now and the remaining 47 seconds. All right, while we, that wasn't 47 seconds, but I'm too anxious to continue talking. While we give the group a time to think about it a little bit, Nissa, maybe I'll direct a question to you. I know you were out at ASTC a couple weeks ago and you were talking about this very subject. Can you share what some of the response has been from either SparkLab network sites or additional organizations and institutions that are implementing the toolkit? I know you've spoken broadly about kind of some things in your session, but if you can give a couple of examples, if you're comfortable, of other places where it's being implemented, if you can talk about that, and or things that you've heard from them about its work in the field.
Yeah, absolutely. So this has always been the goal, and the really exciting piece of creating the toolkit is to see where it takes us. And so we are exploring multiple avenues of what that looks like. One of them that I'll highlight is how this toolkit applies when you take invention-specific identity out of it. It's really relevant to many different museums, science centers, libraries, community centers of learning, to cultivate identity writ large. And this can look a lot of different ways. And so some of the different identities that are actively being explored right now are through our SparkLab Network site at the Nevada Discovery Museum in Reno. What are the identities of discoverers? What are the identities connected to individual exhibits that they have there? Citizens of Reno and Nevada, related to maybe an exhibit about biomedical sciences. What do physicians do? How are you practicing the skills that physicians use? And as well, that site has been actively using the toolkit in the sense of identity more broadly than invention, in training their facilitation staff as they come on board, and really looked at and are continuing to look at the ways in which that shared language affects the staff that are actively facilitating on the floor, and can continue to create conversations amongst staff in ways that can prompt identity exploration in both their visitors and their staff as educators.
Hey, Jesse, you're muted, pal.
If I only do that once today, I'm winning. Thank you, Nissa, for that. Eric, I'm coming to you to put you on the spot in about 30 seconds. Before I do, I know I speak for Eric and Nissa when I say that as the standard bearers for the Smithsonian's mission for the increase and diffusion of knowledge, we do thoroughly encourage folks to reach out and engage us around this topic. This is new work. It is very, very nascent in terms of how it's being implemented, and we would love to help you all bring it to your institutions. Eric, having been a part of the Change Your Game ideation from the jump, having, moved into the role of acting director, where now you're not just overseeing the exhibit, but your programs like this, Spark Lab, everything else. Is there a way that you can articulate for the group kind of the through line around inventive identity from exhibit to Spark Lab to the network to programs like this, the other things that we're working on together? I know it's a broad question, so hopefully that sets you up okay.
No, I appreciate the question. And, I think maybe the best way that I can answer that is to start from the beginning, which is like, why did Jerome Lemelson found the Lemelson Center? So Jerome Lemelson, if you look him up, very prolific individual inventor, over 600 US patents. Many were licensed to, big companies like the big three automakers, IBM, and he became very successful, very wealthy, and he established the Lemelson Foundation, I want to say in like 93 or 94, and then the museum was one of the grantees. So we've been established since about 1995. And so one of Jerry's, passions was, if you think about where we were in the early 90s, it was like, there was this like crisis of competitiveness. So, Japan is going to eat our lunch, right? Like, Toyota and is going to take over GM. And like, there was all this sort of fear. And, and he also just culturally was thinking like, okay, well, kids love Michael Jordan, who was huge in the early 90s. I'm dating myself. But he's like, well, why don't they, I wish kids saw inventors as heroes in the same way they see Michael Jordan as heroes. And so, so that was sort of his passion. And that was a big part of what inspired Jerry and his family to endow the Lemelson Center at the museum. So back to the question, what's the through line? I think the through line is, there's real power in creativity and innovation. It drives our economy. It's important for self-actualization. Like there's all these benefits that come from creativity, invention, science, discovery. And if we can do a little bit of our part to sort of foster that in the folks that walk through our doors, whether it's through an unfacilitated gallery, like Change Your Game, or whether it's a facilitated experience in Spark Lab here, or if it's in one of our Spark Lab network sites out around the country, and we have one in Singapore as well, or if it's like a program that you attend here online or in person where you get to meet an inventor or learn something. I mean, I think that's the through line is so many benefits flow from encouraging people's creativity and innovation. That's kind of the through line is, we're kind of trying to encourage that across the board, no matter what the particular modality is, whether it's a program or Spark Lab or an exhibition.
I love how you brought it back to the namesake. It's definitely a great place to go. So we have about 5 minutes remaining, still no questions from the larger group. So what I might do is put this question to both of you. And I'll defer to who takes it first. Knowing that the exhibit opened, last March, so you're plus or minus a year and a half from having done that. It'll run for, like you mentioned, Eric, at least 5 years. And programming is a key piece of how you look at bringing the exhibit to others, and inventive identity is central to the ideation around that programming. Do you have any ideas for other things that may come in the future that you've been thinking about in terms of ways that folks might engage with this concept, bring it into their classrooms or institutions outside of the toolkit, which we've already talked about? We've got about 5 minutes for that answer, and then I'll move us into a break.
I don't know. You want to rock, paper, scissors for that one, Nissa?
I'll let Nissa go first.
I might need 10 seconds. Yeah.
You just spoke, Eric, so Nissa can go first.
Sorry, Nissa.
Jesse, I think that's such an interesting and difficult question because there's so many possibilities. And to me, as an educator, one of the things I'm so interested in is what does this look like in different contexts, and where does it resonate, but also a little bit the fun of poking holes in things. Where does it not resonate? And so one of the things I'm really excited to explore is how could this go into classrooms to support this idea of using the Vines framework, that identity and self-centered exploration in a learning experience, and how can that be used to support the parents and caregivers who are supporting learning from their children. One of the things we do a lot in Spark Lab is we think about how our facilitators wearing yellow aprons are modeling these inquiry-based facilitation techniques for the adults who come into the space, who may be a little bit less sure of what learning looks like in the space and how they can be a part of it. And so to me, the toolkit, one of the interesting questions is, how can both the toolkit and this sense of facilitating to foster inventive identity support learning throughout a lot of different senses, but especially in adults supporting their children's learning.
Eric, you want to add on to that?
Yeah, sure. One of the things that's that we're starting to learn empirically is that if you want someone to become an inventor, it really helps for them to have an exposure to someone else who's an inventor. So there was some nice research that came out 4 or 5 years ago. The authors are Alex Bell, Raj Chetty, et al. There's like 6 different authors on this paper. I can't remember the title of it, but it got a lot of run in the New York Times and Washington Post and places like that. And if you Google the word "lost Einsteins," you'll find this research. And basically, they did a lot of these are economists, and they did a lot of research where they like take someone's zip code and they take their parents' occupation and they like tied together all this data, and they realized that if like you grew up in a household that had an inventor, if you lived in a zip code that had an inventor, so maybe like Silicon Valley or Cambridge, Boston area, something like that, and you happen to bump into an inventor at the kitchen table or like in your neighborhood or whatever, like it made doing that seem so much more accessible. And then they could trace these people longitudinally, and they could see that, okay, well, if you grew up in one of these environments, you're more likely to become an inventor yourself. And sadly, and this is the lost Einsteins part, the opposite is true also. If you live in sort of an innovation desert where you're not meeting someone like that, it doesn't seem possible for you because you've never seen someone like that, right? So, back to your question, like what are some future things that, we want to do to sort of encourage this kind of inventive thinking and inventive identity is, you can't be what you can't see. We're lucky here. We get 3 million, 4 million people walk through our doors, but not everyone's going to be able to come to Washington, D.C. to visit Spark Lab or visit Change Your Game. One of the things the Smithsonian really wants to do is be digital first. It's so much easier. Everyone's got, most everyone has a cell phone. And so, one of the projects that we're working on right now is called Inspiring STEM Pathways. We're going to go do some cool video shoots with some inventors. We're going to go see their labs, work with them in situ, kind of film them doing what they do, have them talk about themselves, what it means to be an inventor. We're going to edit this stuff up, and coming in 2026, we're going to have 5 nice videos out that we can share. So, check back here for Inspiring STEM Pathways, and that'll be another way digitally, in addition to what you've seen here, where we can help people be inspired to be inventors.
Thank you, Mr. Hintz. So glad you brought up the idea of proximity and ability to connect, and then teased what we have coming in 2026. I want to give everybody another round of appreciation for being engaged with us and sharing some comments in the chat. I see some things from Michelle and Graciela. Thank you, and others popping in here. We're going to take a 15-minute break at this point. So this is, go do whatever you want to do for 15 minutes. And we will come back for our final session of the day, which takes us even deeper into practical application of the theories you've heard about and exploration of inventive identity through some peers. So at different institutions. So we're looking forward to hearing from them. I will introduce them and their work when I come back, and we all come back at, let me see, 2:15 Eastern, 11:15 Pacific. Be well all, and we will see you in 15 minutes.
Thank you, Jesse. Thank you, Nissa.
Welcome back, everyone. I know folks will still be settling in and finishing their quick snacks or grabbing their coffees or whatever else they need. So please continue to feel free to do that. And as you are, I will introduce us to our final session of the day. And this is where we will go even deeper into exploring how the identity frameworks and research that have been presented thus far are playing out in very different practical contexts. From a logistics standpoint, this session will play out similar to the last two, except for we'll have pairs of presenters for each of the two talks. So as we move into the sessions, I'll introduce our first one. The talk is called I Am a Mariner, and it's about fostering the next generation of environmental stewards. It's going to be presented by Andrea Rocchio and Chantel Landry of the Mariners Museum and Park. And as I read their bios, I'll ask them to go ahead and join me on camera, please. Excuse me. Andrea Rocchio is the Park Stewardship Manager for the Mariners Museum and Park. And she directs the new Mariners Park Environmental Research Initiative, manages the water quality program, and cultivates key environmental partnerships. Ms. Rocchio brings 14 years of experience to the role, and previously was a senior science educator where she led the instruction and development of hands-on STEM programming for K-12 students. One of her most notable accomplishments during this time was expanding the education department's outdoor education program through two significant grants: a 3-year NOAA BWET grant and a Virginia DCR education grant. As the principal investigator for both grant projects, she successfully managed their complexities, thoughtfully growing and sustaining the Mariners' environmental education offerings for 3 local school systems. Ms. Rocchio holds an educational background in environmental geology and writing, with professional experience spanning environmental education and stewardship. Chantel Landry is a senior science educator at the Mariners Museum and Park. And after she graduated with her master's degree from the Virginia Institute of Marine Science in 2021, she took a position as an environmental science educator at the park. While she was there, she co-led the BWET program that provided a meaningful watershed educational experience for 9th graders in Newport News public schools. In 2023, she was promoted to senior science educator, where she's responsible for developing and implementing STEM programming for students spanning from elementary to high school. One of the largest accomplishments of her career has been taking over the former BWET, now Lake Stewards program, which has expanded to include 2 additional school districts. Through the success of Lake Stewards, Chantel has been invited to speak about the program at various conferences, including the Black and Marine Science Annual Conference, the National Marine Education Association Conference, and the Mid-Atlantic Marine Education Association Conference. With those introductions complete, I'm going to hand the floor to Andrea and Chantel and welcome them to share the story of Mariners Park programming with our participants.
Wonderful. And thank you so much, Jesse, for that introduction. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Let's make sure. All righty. And then Andrea, since I can see you, can you see the presentation? Fantastic. All right. So hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. And thank you especially to the Lemelson Center for inviting Andrea and I to talk today. We are really excited to share our program that we are going to talk about in our session titled I Am a Mariner, Fostering the Next Generation of Environmental Stewards. So again, Jesse just gave us these wonderful introductions, but I wanted to expand upon that just a little bit. My name is Chantel Landry, and I am a senior science educator at the Mariners Museum and Park.
And I'm Andrea Rocchio, Park Stewardship Manager.
And so just to give you a roadmap of what we will cover today, we will first introduce you to the museum itself and our park. We'll go over our museum mission and then go over the overview basically of our museum. Then we'll dive right into our project beginnings. So we're going to be talking about our BWET program, We're going to talk specifically about what our MIWE, which stands for Meaningful Watershed Educational Experience, is. And then Andrea will take over to talk about some evaluations, results, takeaways, and conclusions for this program. Now, with any talk that I give, I always like to start out with our museum mission because it really drives all of our work that we do at the Mariners Museum and Park. And so the Mariners Museum and Park connects people to the world's waters because through the waters, through our shared maritime heritage, we're connected to one another. What's incredible about this museum is that these are not just flowery words. It really does drive everything that we do, our day-to-day jobs at the museum. What's even more exciting is that for the program that Andrea and I are talking about today, we are actively doing this. So we are bringing students to the water and helping them find their maritime connection and really find who they are as an individual. So just to give you an idea of where we are located, because we are in a small area of Newport News. So we are a museum and park, as we mentioned, located in the heart of Newport News, which you can see in the left picture here, which is on the southern end of the James River. Now, if we focus on the sliver of the right picture, we can zoom in a little bit more. Where that star is where our museum is located, and you can just barely make out the lake and our park that is in addition to our cultural institution. Now, this image gives you a really great view of just how large our campus and footprint is for the museum and park. So the water body that you see here is our wonderful lake called Mariners Lake. All the green area, or most of the green area surrounding that, is going to be our museum park. So in addition to our history museum, we also own 550 acres of parkland. We are often called an urban oasis located in the heart of Newport News. And the two stars that you see towards the right-hand side of this image, these are actually the two different planting sites that Andrea and I are going to highlight today as we discuss our Be Wet program. So we have one site that is pretty close to the James River. So on the very far right-hand side of the picture is the James River. And then the star that's a little bit further inland, still located on our lake, but a little bit further away from the James River. So how did our program get started? Well, this originally actually is in large part due to Andrea. I was hired on as a result of receiving this wonderful program. But the program started as a collaboration between Newport News Public School District leaders, folks at the Mariners Museum and Park, and environmental community partners. And one of the big things was that we were looking to fill a need in the community. What I mean by this is that when we think of MIWEs, again, meaningful watershed educational experiences, a lot of MIWEs are offered to the elementary level student. Sometimes we'll see some in middle school, but very rarely do we have a lot of offerings for high school students. And so for our partners with Newport News Public Schools, they were really interested in not only bringing a MIWE to the school districts, but specifically focusing on high school. And so in collaboration with our museum and our environmental community partners, we started to brainstorm what that could look like. One of the other goals of not only bringing a MIWE to a school district was also to increase understanding of environmental literacy and scientific concepts. If you looked at previous testing scores, you could see that there were areas that where testing scores could be improved. And so the hope was that by bringing a MIWE to these different students, that we could maybe see an increase in their testing scores. And then this last bullet here is especially important to us at the museum. We really wanted to foster a sense of belonging. For our museum, it is really important to us that when folks walk through our door, they know that they are welcome here and that they belong here. This is a museum for them, and we want to cater to them as best as we can, and that includes our students. And so we wanted to make sure that whatever program we developed, it really focused on building that sense of belonging within our students. So to accomplish all this, we applied for the Chesapeake Bay Program's Bay Watershed Education and Training Grant, otherwise known as Be Wet, and we were awarded this grant in 2021. So this was a 3-year-long program, or a 3-year-long grant, and this is how we were able to bring our MIWE experience to our students. So what exactly did and does our MIWI do? Well, as I mentioned, we work with high school students. In particular, we are working with ninth graders, mainly in biology and environmental science classes. For this program, we have 3 engagements with the students. The first is when we go out to the students to meet them at their classrooms, and we're really introducing them to what to expect for the semester. This is where we introduce them to the museum. So even though we are located in the same city as our program or as the students, many of them were unfamiliar with the museum itself. So we wanted to give them an idea of who the heck we were. That way they weren't blindsided by anything. And then we wanted to start introducing some of these scientific concepts to them and environmental concepts. So we would talk about things like watersheds, and we'd talk about Mariners Museum and Park, and we'd really dive into how our lake came to be. So our lake is a man-made lake, and like any other watershed, it has some different environmental issues, and we wanted to see if we could address those issues. One of those issues that we mentioned within this program is how there's a lot of turbidity or really cloudy water within our lake. And the way that we were hoping to address that is actually by planting native aquatic eel grasses called Vallisneria americana within the lake, which you can see in the right-hand picture. That student is holding one of the grasses. And so to help create ownership over this program, something that we did is actually provide tanks with sand and eel grasses to every single school that participated with, or every single teacher that participated in the program. So the students were responsible for basically maintaining the health of the grasses within their classrooms until they came on their field trip, which is the second engagement that we had with our students. And so when it comes to the field trip, this is where that MIWI likes to shine through. And so this is really a lake improvement project that we were focusing in on. The field trip had 3 different components to it. So the crowning jewel, as I like to say, was the actual planting of the grasses themselves. So the students would put on waders, again, which you can see in the right-hand picture here. They'd receive their grasses that they brought with them from their classroom, and they'd plant them directly in our lake. Another thing that they were helping us do was assess the water quality of Mariners Lake. So there were a bunch of different tests that they were conducting, all on their own. We would offer some guiding instructions, but really we wanted the students to have a lot of ownership over the testing themselves. And then the third activity, we partnered with our friends from NOAA's Monitor National Marine Sanctuary, and they would guide the students on a land fishing activity, which really emphasized the importance of monitoring native and non-native species within the lake and the Atlantic Ocean. Now, in addition to all of our engagements with our students, we also wanted to make sure that our teachers felt supported throughout the entirety of a program. And so this is where different teacher professional development opportunities came into play. So we wanted to make sure that the teachers knew that they were supported. If they ever needed anything, they could always come to us. We provided them with resources and some updates on things that they could expect throughout the entirety of the program. Something that's also really exciting that we could do as a part of this program was we actually invited master students to intern with us and really develop their teaching skills and their public speaking skills while working with the students. And so these master students that we were working with would come from various backgrounds. A lot of them tended to be more environmental backgrounds, but they would have different interests, and we would really let them shine and work with our students and kind of grow those skills, which was a fantastic thing for this program. So just to give you an idea of the scope of our BWET program. So for the first year of our program, again, this was in 2021, we saw 2 high schools within Newport News, 543 students, and a total of 7 teachers. Now, when you see the number of student engagements, you'll notice that that number is higher than the number of students. What that means is, say, if we see one student, Johnny, but we saw him 3 times, we are counting each of those individual interactions within the engagements. So that's why the engagement number will be higher than the total number of students. Going from year 1 to year 2, we were a little ambitious, and we decided to scale up rather quickly. And so in year 2, we actually saw all 7 public high schools within Newport News. We very quickly expanded to just shy of 2,000 students, and we saw 32 teachers. And then we had similar numbers for year 3 in terms of teachers. When you notice the number of students, you'll see that the numbers actually went down for year 3. That's actually not such a bad thing as some folks might think. The result of the lower number of students is because we actually saw an increase in the SOL testing, so standards of learning testing scores for biology. And so less students were enrolled in environmental science classes. So even though we interacted with less students, we actually saw it as a good thing because their testing scores were higher. When it comes to the field trip, I also wanted to give you an idea of how many students would attend the field trip. So you can see those numbers as a result. So just shy of 400 in the first year. We saw around 1,200 for the second year, just shy of 900 for the third year. And total, if we were to add up how many grasses have been planted within Mariners Lake, that would be around 2,516 square feet of grasses that have been planted in the lake, which is really exciting. And we've actually seen some results, some water quality results as an impact from these grasses. And so what I'm going to do now is actually turn it over to Andrea to talk about how we evaluated the success of this program.
Thank you, Chantel. For our evaluation, we collaborated with the Center for Educational Partnerships at Old Dominion University, where Dr. Garner is, of course, with Newport News Public Schools, and then with us, the Mariners Museum and Park. We utilized the VINES framework, as been talked about before. So this really prioritizes the visitor's learning of that content knowledge at, in our case, a museum. And what also makes us really special in this framework is that we are at a museum and park, but we're really outside. They weren't in the museum. For this, Chantel went over this a little bit, but we had 3 guiding principles or ideas for the assessment. We wanted to assess the knowledge that the students took away of these watershed concepts. We wanted to track these attitude shifts. So that's where that sense of belonging and role identity comes in, and also the DSMRI. And we wanted to determine what students were learning about, not just the environment, but also themselves within the environment. We used 3 big tools for evaluation, which were mind maps. I'll talk about that in just a moment, pre and post program surveys, and of course, field observations. Slide. The mind maps were a unique journey that we went on throughout all 3 years. So the first year of the program, we were trying to create an evaluation that was meaningful and that went along with our students and our teachers and fit our program. And so the first year, we were not collecting information from students. That came the second year and the third year. So the first year, we were really trying out these different kind of mind map assessments. And a mind map, if you haven't heard of that before, is a really unique way to peer into somebody's mind and assess how they understand concepts. So if you remember 2021, we're still in the midst of a pandemic, and we really had to think strategically to come up with how we were going to evaluate students if we couldn't do it in person. We came up with a digital mind map. And that's the one that you see on the left with the yellow and blue terms. And then quickly, after we did it for about a semester with our pilot group of teachers and students, the teachers said that we needed a paper version. And so we switched. Even in this technology age, we switched from digital to paper, and the students seemed to really respond to it a lot better as well. Slide. So this is a close-up of what that first mind map looked like. The yellow terms are concept terms. The blue are linking terms or concepts. And really, we were trying to ask the central question. In this case, we wanted to keep it pretty broad. How does pollution affect an ecosystem? and try to have terms that were negative and positive, and see pre and post program if the students could place them correctly. And that was that big way that we were going to assess it. So you can see the yellow terms on one side, that's our little word bank. And the blue terms, the linking terms, were on the other side. And you can see that this student who identified as cats, that was another way that we identified, not just by the class, but the favorite animal that they chose. They actually did some really cool concepts that they built. So we have, for example, on the negative side, drought can increase fires. That's a great concept for us to understand that they know itself. On the positive end, human activity affects the oceans and can be improved by the 3 R's. So it was a really unique way to show how people are moving through the program and learning concepts. Slide. When we switched to the paper, we saw even more interesting evaluations. And one thing that we really wanted to focus on that Dr. Garner was also trying to help us understand too, which goes into that DSMRI, is where students see themselves. So me was a term on both the digital and the paper version, but we wanted to see where students saw themselves within this larger ecosystem and how they can be a change in their system. So as you can see on the right side of this particular example, ways that they can increase the health of the ecosystem, as this person said that they can do it. And they didn't necessarily say how they can do it, but they were talking about other positives within the change that they can see. Slide. In the second year, we moved to an online evaluation that we used in the second and third year. We also did a survey as well. And the far right, you can see what the online version of this mind map took the form of. So the teachers, every year, we have a great info session with them. They talk to Dr. Garner and her research students, and they give us feedback. And it's actually really, really important that we get that feedback, because we want to make sure that our program is the best that it can be. And this was a direct result. So they said the mind map's not working so great with their students. We kept that same idea, but we changed it a little bit. So one of Dr. Garner's research students, she created this in Qualtrics, and it's basically a drag and drop. So they're the word bank terms, the planting trees, cleaning up trash, for example, and then they had to place it in the correct box, and this was a pre and post activity. They needed to see that it was a problem or a solution. And as you can see, our question is very much more specific the second time around. So we thought, let's take that leap and say, yes, they're going to understand more about Mariners Lake specifically, not just the environment overall. On the other side, you can see 2 translations of our evaluation of other portions of the evaluation. So we met with the school district, Newport News Public Schools, and we said, they identified that they needed some extra translations because not all students speak English, especially in those particular years. We were getting a lot of students who were other language speakers. So they identified Spanish and Farsi as the 2 main languages that we would like to, help to spread throughout the whole program. So we worked really hard to do that in all program aspects, including our evaluation. Slide. These are our results, and I would encourage you to also talk to Dr. Garner if you have more questions about it. You can ask us questions too, and we have a publication that we'll share at the end as well. One of the big things that we saw was that a stewardship attitude changed. So more students at the end of the program saw environmental hope versus despair, which is a good thing. Slide. Students also learned about watershed concepts, which was fantastic. That was one of the really important things that we hoped would come out of this particular evaluation. So they They learned about these very specific concepts we covered in our MIWE, or Meaningful Watershed Educational Experience. They understood for themselves that the environment is in need of help, and they also knew that they were the ones who could help the environment. Slide. So this is a graph that Dr. Garner had put together for one of our teacher PDs at the end of a year to show, what was the result of these evaluations. And what you're looking at, so you see terms on one side, and the red indicates that it's a problem or seen as a problem, and the bluish purple color indicates that it is a solution to help Mariners Lake. So essentially, this is showing that the students post-program were correctly placing these items. So let's say tree planting, that was seen as a solution. Litter was seen as a problem. They also were making up their own terms, which is really exciting. At the bottom of the slide, you can see some of the examples. They were like erosion, oxygen depletion, algae, deforestation. These were things that we were directly talking about in the program, and they were putting those terms in themselves and placing them correctly as either a solution or something seen as a problem. Slide. We also, of course, this is the big topic for today, we saw those identity shifts and those role identity shifts. So this is where the DSMRI comes in. The self-perceptions of the students changed. For example, we have, there's the positive and the negative, that they enjoyed talking about these environmental issues more than they thought. And then on the negative side, they don't really like water, but that's still important that they went through an experience and they had a shift. The beliefs of the students also changed. So one example is that their voice matters within environmental issues, which is really, really important. Their action possibilities changed, and that could be, I should consider this as a major. And then their purposes and goals changed. And for example, a really big one would be, I want to help the environment in the future as much as I can. I'll let you take a moment and read through these quotes, but these are more examples of how students have changed and shifted their role identities. And we couldn't have asked for more realistic and better quotes from these students. So I'll let you read it for a couple of seconds. Takeaways from our DSMRI and the Vines framework. One really big thing that we wanted to get out of this evaluation with the Center for Educational Partnerships is that we wanted an evaluation system for all of our programs, not just this particular outdoor science program. And the framework actually really delivered for us. So we were able to apply some of these concepts across the different subjects that were in museum and outside. And that was really exciting for us. Some of the most useful methods, and this is something if you're a formal classroom teacher, you have used this a lot, but having some kind of exit ticket or a token to evaluate your role and any kind of identity changes, or if you would want to come back, things of that nature. So we use different forms of exit tickets throughout our programs as well. Observation was pretty important, especially in those early years. Now with the program called Lake Stewards, we have a larger observational piece, which is important, of course, to understand how the students are engaging with the program. And of course, the teachers have the feedback loop that I talked about before, and our partners have this feedback as well. And the teachers are in a closed session with Dr. Gardner, And they share really important feedback that allows us, as I mentioned before, to make our program even better. And that's something important for people out there who work at museums. You have to essentially be okay with people saying it wasn't very good, and working from there and making it better, because you just have to hear those hard words for it to be the best program. Slide. Our conclusions are essentially that the program is very effective, especially in our outdoor setting and even museum settings. This particular Vines framework and the DSMRI was very helpful for us. So we had this MIWI, Meaningful Watershed Educational Experience, and these 3 particular touch points, they led to identity shifts in students. They saw themselves differently after this program. Teachers especially embraced this role identity. Dr. Garner mentioned it in her talk before, but the teachers could really be science teachers. They talked about lots of different interesting things with the tanks and being on the field trip, and it was really cool to see that. Our community partners also shifted. We have this subsect of the program that's still continuing on today called the Mariners Environmental Co-op. And our partners have shifted their identity to help us with this program as well. And the Mariners Institution itself has an identity shift. So we went from just being a history museum, a history institution, to really being an environmental hub in the area. Slide. You can check us out. We have a video that Chantal is going to share in a moment, and we also have the publication that Joanna and I and her students jointly wrote as well. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Andrea and Chantel. What a great session and way to kind of dive us deeper into how this work is looking in practice. I love how this work really allows us to see how identity can be tied to place. The concept of a watershed is such a unique thing for kids that I really enjoy how you're interpreting this work through that lens. So thank you for the incredible work that you are doing. If you're out there thinking about questions for these 2, hold them, because we're going to come back to questions for all 4 presenters after we finish the next 2. So which is my subtle but not so subtle transition to the next discussion that we will be diving into, and our final discussion of the day, which is going to look at role identity in practice and focus on teachers engaging with difficult histories through oral history. The presenters of this session, and as I read their names, I'll ask them to come on, and then I'll read their bios once they're on, are Dr. Yongyi Su and Dr. Brian Doherty. Good to see you both. Dr. Yongyi Su is a professor of social studies education at Old Dominion University, whose research examines how educators engage with difficult histories, particularly school desegregation, through professional development. Drawing on frameworks such as historical inquiry, teacher role identity, and critical engagement with primary sources, she investigates how teachers' identities, beliefs, and sociocultural contexts influence their instructional decisions. Supported by multiple federal grants from the National Endowment for the Humanities and the Library of Congress, she designs and studies professional learning experiences that promote inquiry-based instruction and reflective practice. Her scholarship bridges history education, teacher learning, and interdisciplinary collaboration. Recent publications in the Journal of Social Studies Research, Teacher Development, and Professional Development in Education explore teachers' historical framing, collaborative problem solving, and role identity shifts across varied contexts. Brian Doherty is a historian at Virginia Commonwealth University, whose research focuses on the implementation of the Supreme Court's 1954 Brown v. Board of Education decision and the civil rights movement more broadly in Virginia. He has published 3 books and a variety of journal articles and book reviews related to this subject. Professor Doherty received his PhD in history from the College of William and Mary and has received grants to fund his research and related projects from the National Endowment for the Humanities, Library of Congress, Virginia Foundation for the Humanities, now known as the Virginia Humanities, Virginia Historical Society, now known as Virginia Museum of History and Culture, and Duke University, among others. My new friends, Youngie and Brian, the floor is yours to bring us home with a discussion and study of your work.
Thank you so much, Jess, and I'm gonna bring our PowerPoint. Again, thank you, Jess, for a great introduction, and good afternoon, everyone. We'd like to begin by thanking the Lemelson Center and Joanna for inviting us to participate in this year's New Perspective Symposium. It's an honor to share our work at this important event. And also we want to thank our funding agencies, National Endowment for the Humanities and Library of Congress Teaching the Primary Sources Program. Without their generous support, this interdisciplinary work between history and education would not have been possible. And most importantly, I want to say thank for the teachers who participated in our teacher professional development for openly sharing their hopes and concerns about teaching the difficult history of school desegregation. I'm Yong-hee Seo from Old Dominion University, and I'm here with my co-director, Brian Doherty from Virginia Commonwealth University. Together, we lead teacher professional development program focusing on the history of school desegregation. Our program using primary sources, especially oral history, we have been providing this professional development since 2015. We find oral history can help teachers and students hear the voices and lived experiences that is oftentimes left out from the textbooks, making this difficult history more immediate and personal. And also we find or engagement with oral history can serve as a tool to help teachers, in our case, explore their role identities. So this afternoon, Brian is going to share how we frame school desegregation as a difficult history and the significance of oral history in the context of our PD. Then I will talk about how we apply DSMRI to really make sense that what and how our participants learn to teach the difficult history of school desegregation, which involves the shifts in their role identities. And then Brian is going to close the session by sharing the resources that we have developed for further exploration. Brian?
Thank you, Young-hee, and thank you to everyone at the Smithsonian who's helped to put together this event and coordinate it. And thank you also to Joanna and Abi for inviting us and for sharing the DSMRI with us. As Young-hee mentioned, we frame and define oral history as part of our study with regard to the history of school desegregation as a difficult history. When many people think of school desegregation or the Brown versus Board of Education decision, it's in a celebratory context. But it's important to recognize that the school desegregation process was long, it was difficult, it was contested, and it remains so all the way up to the present day. So as you can see, oral history and school desegregation incorporates a painful, contested, violent events into the national narrative, creates a sense of recognition and acknowledgement, and as I think is well understood, can evoke emotional, moral, and intellectual responses from those who are engaged with it. Next slide, please. Our professional development workshops, as Young-hee mentioned, have been funded by the National Endowment for the Humanities, the Landmarks of American History and Culture program, as well as the Library of Congress Teaching with Primary Sources program. Our NEH workshops are titled The Long Road from Brown, School Desegregation in Virginia. The relevant professional development workshops were held in July of 2021, virtually, as mentioned with the Mariners Museum project. although we also held previous iterations in 2015, 2017, and our work was funded in 2025, but those workshops unfortunately were canceled. In the 2021 workshops, which are most relevant to today's talk, we hosted 68 school teachers, primarily grades 6 through 12 social studies teachers from 23 states across the United States. We selected those participants out of over 300 applications. The goals of this program were to help teachers develop a deeper understanding of the history of school desegregation in Virginia, and also to help teachers use their knowledge and the skills that they gain via our workshops to teach this in their own communities and particularly within their classrooms. During 1 week in July, so we have 2 workshops back to back, essentially 1 week each. During that time period, participants interacted via lectures with historians and other guest speakers. They heard from archivists and museum educators, and they visited virtually historic sites associated with the history of school desegregation in Virginia. In addition, our teacher participants worked with their peers and on their own to develop lesson plans in which to utilize this new content knowledge in their own classrooms. Our second professional development program, funded again by the Library of Congress, is called Stories Untold: School Desegregation in the Context of U.S. History. In this program, we recruited 15 teachers who had participated in our NEH workshops in July 2021, and we hosted those teachers in a series of 9 online monthly professional development workshops, essentially supplemental professional development workshops during the school year of 2021-2022. In this program, teachers learned how to navigate the digital collections of the Library of Congress and to further develop and teach and reflect on the lesson plans that they had developed over the course of the summer. Content-wise, we also wanted our participants to connect their local stories in their communities and their schools with the broader narrative of U.S. history. And I have to note that the Library of Congress's digital collections, particularly those related to oral history interviews of civil rights activists and leaders, were very helpful for our participants in that regard. Next slide, please. As I have indicated, oral history serves as a signature pedagogy in our professional development workshops. We had always hosted sessions that included firsthand accounts from individuals that had been involved in the school desegregation process in Virginia. And after our first workshops, the overwhelmingly positive response from our participants led us to actually increase the amount of an emphasis that we had on oral history and on firsthand accounts with regard to school desegregation in Virginia. Oral history interviews have a lot of unique kind of benefits, if you will, not only to the study of the past, but also how we teach that. Oral histories can supplement our historical documents with regard to this subject matter. Sometimes those documents are very difficult to come by when we're talking about the history of school desegregation. And oral history accounts might be the only methodology of getting that information. In addition, oral history promotes an engagement, an inspirational element that's oftentimes lacking with regard to other sources of information. So during our professional development workshops in July of 2021, we had 3 sessions that focused on oral history and firsthand accounts. 2 of those sessions were in communities in Virginia that were integral to the history of school desegregation in the state and, in fact, across the country. Prince Edward County, Virginia, home of one of the 5 cases in Brown versus Board of Education, and New Kent County, Virginia, shown here, which was home to the Green versus New Kent County United States Supreme Court decision of 1968. During these sessions, historians, including myself, asked questions of the participants, and then our teacher participants were able to ask questions in addition. Our third oral history session, which we developed in 2017, have continued from that point forward, focused more on the methodology involved in oral history interviews and engaged a research project, an ongoing research project about oral history and school desegregation. It examined online collections of oral history interviews that could be used in the classroom. And it allowed teachers to gain some experience in teaching oral history as a methodology with regard to the historical content that they're engaged in their classrooms. Next slide, please.
Very different context compared to the 3 previous presentations, right? So how did we apply DSMRI in our professional development programs? So we viewed, like other projects, learning as identity change and used DSMRI to study what and how teachers learn to teach a difficult history from our PDs by engaging oral history. So teacher identity is dynamic, shaped by, as this figure really shows us, their self-perceptions, goals, beliefs, and action possibilities within unique socio-cultural contexts. For us, DSMRI revealed how teachers, our PD participants, engagement with oral history as a complex sources influenced their evolving professional role identities. And we also considered our participants' engagement with oral history as a historical experience where cognitive, emotional, and physical engagement came together. And we specifically looked for those moments. And these moments showed us teachers reconsidering goals, expanding action possibilities, and reframing who they are as an educator of difficult histories. So to examine the impact of our PD on teacher learning, which is their identity change, we collected data at 4 points. So before and after the NEH Landmarks workshops and during and after TPS programs. To make sense of this data, including interviews, unit plans that they created within the small groups where they can exchange feedback from their peers, as well as video recordings of their small group sessions. We turned to DSMRI, and DSMRI really helped us both how we coded the data and how we interpreted teachers' historical experiences in our PD. So our research is centered on 2 main questions. First, how do teachers' pre-existing role identities shape their engagement with the oral history in the context of the PD? Second, how does this cognitive, affective, and physical engagement with oral history shift teachers' role identities? So with those questions in mind, we're going to share 3 major findings that emerged from this analysis. So before we walk through the 3 findings, I'd like to introduce the 3 teachers whose experience highlight the patterns we saw in their engagement with oral history in our programs. And the data comes from our 2021 version of PD, meaning, as Brian mentioned, the 68 teachers participated in our 2021 NEH and later Library of Congress TPS program. So out of 68, we are presenting 3 teachers as examples. So the first teacher, Lindsay, a white female veteran teacher from a large, diverse northeastern city. Mia, black female veteran teacher from a mid-sized, diverse mid-Atlantic city. Nick, a white male veteran teacher from a predominantly white Midwestern city. Across all 3, their existing role identities shaped how they cognitively, affectively, and physically engage oral history and the action possibilities they adopted for teaching difficult history of school desegregation. Oral history also created new awareness, surfaced tensions, and in some cases, deepened commitments. What they looked like, though, was very unique for each teacher and closely tied to their local and sociocultural context. So the first pattern we noticed was how teachers' pre-existing role identities, especially their perception about their social identity characteristics, like race, shaped the meaning that they made from oral history. For Mia, a Black female teacher, oral history validated her own lived experience and her family's story as a legitimate form of historical knowledge that she can share with her students. So as she put it, as you can see that on the slide, I literally was sitting there like my grandmother went through that. And for Lindsay, white female teacher, oral history helped her navigate the tensions she felt as a white teacher working with a diverse body of students. So she often described putting herself on the shelf when teaching topics such as desegregation. But when she heard both Black and white students' perspectives, she realized that how oral history could create space for multiple voices in the classroom. And likewise, for Nick, who worried about sounding like he was preaching to his predominantly white students, hearing firsthand accounts of school desegregation, as you see from the slide, gave him the confidence to teach the topic more authentic way to his white students. So across these cases, oral history worked both as a mirror, affirming teachers' own role identities, like Mia, and as a catalyst, like Lindsay and Nick, helped them connect history not only to themselves, but also to their students' identity, and resolving their identity tensions. The second pattern we observed was that physical engagement with oral history often served as a powerful entry point for teachers to explore their role identities. So through this process, teachers began to see themselves not just as classroom instructors, but as carrying multiple, co-activating role identities, such as a long-time community resident, a mother, a historian, and a citizen. In other words, oral history created a space where teachers could draw on these different roles, weaving them into how they think about and practice teaching the difficult history of school desegregation. So for Mia, it was about exploring her identity not only as a teacher, but also a mom and a member of her local community, as well as a historian. For Lindsay, oral history became a way of connect past and the present in her own community, what she described as intergenerational conversation. For Nick, oral history also offered a way to connect with his own community that he didn't really had before he engaged oral history, linking historical struggles to ongoing conversations today in his own community. So across the context, oral history was more than just a teaching tool. It became a powerful bridge to personal and professional identity. So the third pattern we saw was how oral history encouraged teachers to shift their role identity as a teacher that aligned with movement toward more ethical, inquiry-based teaching. For example, Mia raised an equity-focused question. How can I get these students to realize that if it took death, it took hurting, it took pain for you to be sitting in these classes? For her, oral history was about helping her students, predominantly Black students, understand the moral weight of desegregation. Lindsay imagined case studies where students would craft interview questions for both sides, Black and white. The kind of activity pushes, she thought, students to think critically and empathetically. And for Nick stressed that students thrive on the doing of history, not just receiving it. And oral history gave him a way to design instruction where students can actively engage with the evidence. So taken together, these reflections show how oral history supported teachers in reframing their action possibilities, not only around content, but also around ethics, equity, and inquiry. So what does that all mean to us? As we step back, there are a few lessons we've learned from this work. First, teachers' meaning making was already shaped by the identities that they brought with them, things like race, gender, and their own schooling experiences. And oral history didn't erase those identities. However, it gave them a new lens to see how their commitments and tensions played out in the classroom. Second, context mattered. Teachers' local communities and student demographics shaped how they interpreted oral history and what action possibilities they saw for themselves and for their students. And finally, implications for PD designers. Identity shifts take place within when PD creates space for both reflection and what we call constructive discomfort, supporting teachers in working through, not avoiding, the tensions that come with the teaching difficulty histories. So the big takeaway is that oral history is a powerful tool, but only when PD is designed to recognize teachers as learners, give them space to reflect on identity and context, and support them in moving toward ethical, inquiry-driven practice. And if you remember, we used the DSMRI as an assessment tool for us. Really makes sense what our participants gained from our program. However, interestingly, I found we returned to design principles you all used when you design your exhibitions and learning activities for students and teachers, creating safe space and have them talk about identity and context. So that's what we found. And now Brian is going to share the resources that we've developed so far.
Thank you, Young-hee, for such a wonderful summation and discussion of our research and our professional development opportunities. We're going to share in the chat now a link to the Long Road from Brown website, which is the website that we created for our National Endowment for the Humanities professional development workshops, the teacher development workshops that are part of the American History and Culture project. On this website, or in this website, you'll see testimonials from participants that have taken part in our workshops over the 3 iterations that have occurred. And we hope that you teachers that are out there that are interested in this subject matter will consider applying in the future. In addition, you'll see teacher resources on the website. This includes lesson plans that were developed by former participants, including lesson plans that relate to oral history as a methodology and a pedagogical tool, as we've discussed today. Also, you'll find a list of online collections of oral history interviews where you can go and obtain historical content straight from the mouths of individuals who were part of this history itself. And finally, on the website, you'll see research that Young-hee and I have published along with other scholars related to the DSMRI, and linking our professional development workshops with an ongoing effort to improve our professional development and that of other scholars across the country. I'd like to thank you so much for taking the time, and we look forward to your questions.
Thank you so, excuse me. Thank you so much, Brian and Young-hee, for a fantastic and engaging discussion to bring us to a close today. We have about 10 minutes or so to do some Q&A, and I do have one that I want to start with. So stand by as I pull it up and read it. And it is a very short and sweet one, leaving a lot of room for you to go forth in whatever way you see fit. And the question is, how do you see this work evolving over the next few years?
Brian, you can jump in once I share. We are building this work through our new project titled Empowering Teacher Educators at Cultural Institutions, bridging the gap between rural school desegregation, bridging the gap in understanding and teaching rural school desegregation. And we are working with not individual teachers, but educators at cultural institutions such as archives, museums, and historic sites. So by working with educators who work with the K-12 educators and giving them the tool and strategies to work with the K-12 educators, I believe that we are making a bigger impact, more systematic impact, so that they can really help teachers engage difficult histories such as school desegregation. So that's where we are going, and we are very excited about it. And we just finished the first year piloting our program. And year 2, we are recruiting participants from nationwide. So we are really hoping building a kind of network of educators at cultural institutions to work together so that they can deposit their strategies and resources and help each other. So we are very excited where we are going based on what we have done so far.
And I'll just add briefly that we're thrilled to be partnering with Joanna on a book chapter related to this work, and we are excited to be traveling to an international conference here in the near future. Where we'll be discussing our research. So we've got a lot to be thankful for.
Well, thank you for letting us know where you're going with the next frontier of the work. I will say it was a great way for us to recontextualize these ideas around some high stakes teaching concepts. So good on you for being so thoughtful around helping to make these conversations and the bringing of this knowledge to young people more accessible for educators and helping them to think about how to do it efficiently. We have another question for all 4 of the group, and I'm going to let Andrea and Chantel take it first. And the question is this. Thank you for sharing your important work. In both cases, the primary goal is to shift the identities of teachers and students you're serving. But I'm wondering if you've had a reflexive impact from your identity work. Have you, the practitioners, experienced your own identity shifts or new self-perceptions or action possibilities as a result of the work that you do?
Yeah, I don't mind taking a stab at this question first. So I know personally, I definitely have experienced an identity shift. I came straight from my master's degree to this position. And in informal education, if anybody else is in informal education, you know that it can be really tricky to develop a rapport with students when you are only seeing them for at most maybe 90 minutes of their day versus their formal teacher where they are seeing them basically the entire school year. And so it's pretty easy to develop a rapport with your formal teacher. But as an informal educator, I did not realize how you can still develop a rapport with students and teachers in such a short amount of time. And so through this program, I really was kind of shown how much of an impact I can have on these students and teachers' lives. Many of these teachers now I have really good working relationships with. They are really excited to see me. I'm excited to see them. Even past students who I've maybe interacted with 3 times, they recognize my face. So it's really awesome to realize how much of an impact I can have and how much of a resource I can be for the students. And on the museum side, and Andrea touched upon this during our presentation, the museum really has kind of emerged as this environmental partner and resource for folks within our immediate community. And I think that's a really interesting route that the museum wasn't anticipating on taking. And it's really interesting and neat to explore where it's been taking us.
That was a great answer. I don't know how to follow that up.
Agree.
So when I saw the BWET grant come up, and this was like 2020, and we're in the midst of the pandemic, and I thought this could be something really, really cool. And we went for it. It was a dive into the unknown, and I can echo things that Chantel just said, but I think that, yes, I've personally grown a lot after this experience, and And I feel like the position that I'm in now was highly shaped by the experience with BWET and Lake Stewards. And yeah, I have been an environmental educator in the informal setting for many years before this, but it gave me some really great experience working, as Chantel said, working with students and teachers directly, not just for a one-off experience, but for these multiple touch points. And that was actually the key, was not just doing it once, but doing it many times throughout the school year. And then as a whole, for our education department at the museum, we have this larger goal of seeing students through many points throughout their educational time. So, we see students in early childhood, we see them in 3rd grade, sometimes 4th grade, 5th grade, 6th grade, sometimes 7th and 9th. And so it's been this really cool experience. And yeah, our larger institution, the Mariners Museum and Park, has absolutely shifted from just a history museum that people, didn't always know about, to the Mariners, that we even have in some way a name change, because there are so many things within our institution that we want the community to embrace and understand. And we also, many years ago now, we went to dollar admission. So the park is free to come into, the museum is just $1. And it makes those connections that we've made with these partnerships and these programs even more fulfilling.
And I'll
Great.
just add fairly quickly that absolutely, Jesse, I've seen my role change and kind of the expectations I have with regard to my work expand and kind of transformed over the last 10 years. Youngie and I have had a wonderful partnership, and I've gone from starting my career as a high school teacher, social studies teacher, through to become a professor of history focusing on the civil rights era and the civil rights movement. And now really spending a lot of my time working as a teacher educator and a development of professional opportunities, professional workshops and development opportunities for educators of all backgrounds and all types, whether they be in the K through 12 system, or now we're working quite a bit with museum educators. So it's been a wonderful journey, and it's been an eye-opening experience at almost every turn. And the DSMRI has really helped me to understand how to acknowledge those changes and how to kind of manage them as I go into the next phase of my career. So thank you for that question.
Youngie, do you want to take it?
I just want to say, Chantel and Andrea, you guys are doing great. I'm going to share your project with my colleague in Science Lab. So cool. So cool. So cool. Anyways, DSMRI really has been helping me a lot in multiple ways. But one thing that just comes to my mind is that, like my teachers, it helped me resolve my identity tension. So I'm trained as an educational researcher. However, when Brian and I provide these PDs, I'm between the practical world of K-12 education and academic world of history as a discipline and educational research. And sometimes I feel like I juggle where I belong and what values and norm I need to highlight in my PD. And it was a struggle for me before I used DSMRI and make sense of this tension is very organic and natural, and I can just use multiple hats in different contexts. So yeah, the DSMRI really helped me understand who I am, and also have a new lens to look at my struggles and resolve my tensions. It's okay to wear multiple hats, right? And I can switch the hats depending on the goals and the context. So thanks, DSMRI.
If that's not a perfect way to bring us to our closing remarks from Mr. Hintz, I don't know what is. We're 5 minutes shy of getting everybody out on time, which during the middle of a business day is very important. So, Mr. Hintz, why don't you bring us home, if you don't mind?
Sure thing. Thank you so much to everyone. Thank you, Jesse. And thank you to everyone who participated today. As we conclude the program, I'll ask our program producer, Jason, to share one final slide while I thank several people who contributed to today's symposium. First, I just want to thank Chantel Landry, Andrea Rocchio, Younghee Su, and Brian Doherty for sharing their research and engaging in a really stimulating conversation in this previous session. I'd also like to thank our earlier speakers, Nissa Buning and Joanna Garner, while sending our best wishes to Avi Kaplan, who is unable to join us today. Special thanks to Joanna and Avi for helping us organize today's symposium on role identity and for recruiting our terrific presenters. So thank you, DSMRI. It's clear that the dynamic systems model of role identity and the related Vines framework have wide applicability across many different learning environments. So today we saw classrooms, we saw museums, we saw outdoor education, and I know that there are probably many more other applications and spaces where that could be applied. So I just want to say thanks again to everyone for sharing your fascinating work. And I hope those who have attended today will leave with some new tools and methodologies that will aid your own work. I'd like to thank our moderator, Jesse Lovejoy. Jesse, thank you for being the master of ceremonies today and keeping us on track. And I'd also like to thank my Lemelson Center colleagues who helped develop and produce the symposium, especially our team behind the scenes operating the Zoom Control Center, Jason Morris, Laura Havel, and especially our captioners from Joyful Signing to make sure that we're always accessible. Excuse me. Finally, I'd like to thank you, our audience. Thank you so much for the energy and engagement you brought to each of our sessions. We really appreciate the experiences that you shared, all of your thoughtful comments and questions. We really appreciate your time today. Thanks for coming out online. Looking ahead, after some post-production work, we plan to post the video from today's symposium on the Lemelson Center YouTube channel and at the event website at invention.si.edu. And we'll also just invite you to use the QR code here to sign up for the Lemelson Center's e-newsletter. We hope you'll come back and join us for future Lemelson Center events and programming in 2026. So with that, thanks again to everyone who participated in today's symposium, Exploring Role Identity Across Learning Environments, New Perspectives. That's a wrap. Thank you again and have a great afternoon. Take care.